Picture the most beautiful palace in the world. Now fill it with 40,000 people who all need clean shirts. Add 17 years of construction, a king who changes his linen 4 times a day, and a court where appearing in public with a wrinkled cravat is grounds for social death. That's Versailles, the greatest theatre ever built, the grandest performance of absolute power that human beings have ever staged. A place where you could watch the King of France eat his breakfast as a formal public ceremony in the morning, and scrub his blood off linen by candlelight before anyone woke up. We're going back there tonight. Not as courtiers, not as tourists admiring the Hall of Mirrors. We're going to the part that made the Hall of Mirrors possible. The service corridors, the laundry rooms, the women with burning hands who kept the whole performance running. The part that had to be invisible so that the beauty above it could be believed. One day, one woman, everything she would have lifted, scrubbed, wrung, carried and survived. I make these history stories, and honestly I don't entirely know who falls asleep to an episode about 18th century French laundresses, but I suspect you're the kind of person who finds something soothing in other people's hard work, which is either very healthy or something to think about. Either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable, here we go. Your hands wake up before you do. That's the first thing. Not your eyes, not your ears, not the cold. Your hands. Before you've remembered where you are or what day it is, before consciousness has fully assembled itself out of the dark, you feel your hands. The knuckles swollen. The skin between your fingers cracked so deeply that the cracks have cracked. A topography of small wounds that sting in the cold even before you move them. The lie did this. It always does this. You've been here 7 months and your hands have aged 10 years. Your mother's hands look like this and she's been washing linen since she was 12, which means she has been washing linen for 30 years, which means you're looking at your own future when you look at hers. You're 18 years old. Your hands are already old. The dormitory is dark. Not the gentle dark of late night, but the absolute dark of before dawn. The November dark that presses against your face like cold cloth and means precisely nothing good. The fire collapsed to ash hours ago. The candles burned to nothing while you slept. Through the high, narrow window, the kind of window that is high and narrow specifically because the people sleeping in this room are not supposed to need much light. There is no moon visible, only cloud, and the cloud means the temperature dropped before midnight and kept dropping, and you can see this fact written in your own breath, a soft fog in the black air. You lie still for a moment. 7 women breathe around you. Hortense, next to you, snores with the commitment of someone entirely at peace with herself, which at this hour you find simultaneously enviable and difficult. Across the room, someone shifts on her pallet and resettles into silence. Somewhere further away in the building, muffled by thick walls, by service quarter architecture designed to absorb the noise of necessary labour, something is moving. Carts, probably. The delivery wagons that feed Versailles start their work well before any courtier opens an eye. The palace eats an extraordinary amount of food every day. Hundreds of people across dozens of kitchens, an entire small city requiring grain and meat and wine and candles and coal, and all of it arrives through service gates, in wagons, through the pre-dawn dark that the people doing the arriving inhabit as a matter of course. You've never used the main gates. In 7 months you've used the same door every single day. A wooden door at the base of a staircase on the eastern side of the service quarter, leading to a cobbled yard that smells like wet stone and horse and, in November, something frozen underneath. That's your Versailles. The bells will ring in approximately 20 minutes. You don't need to know this by looking at anything. Your body has calibrated itself to this place's rhythms the way a sailor's body calibrates to the movement of a ship, without intention, without permission, just through enough days of the same sequence that the sequence has become something you know in your muscles. The bells will ring, and you will be expected to be already moving when they do, or already at the laundry, or already in some state of readiness that demonstrates you're not a person who needs to be woken. You want to be at the pump before the kitchen workers. This is a practical consideration with a 7-minute window. You sit up. The cold arrives comprehensively. The floor is stone. It is always stone, everywhere in the service quarter, because stone cleans easily and doesn't rot, and nobody who designed these rooms thought to ask whether the people sleeping on the floor above it might prefer something that held heat. You have wrapped rags around the bottoms of your wooden shoes. A trick Hortense showed you your 3rd day. It helps. It doesn't help enough. You dress in the dark by touch. Chemise first. The working chemise, soft enough to sleep in, rough enough to work in, the one with the fraying at the left cuff that you keep meaning to mend on your Sunday afternoons and keep not managing, because by Sunday afternoon you are asleep on your pallet before you've fully committed to being awake. Then the bodice, laced without looking at what you're doing. Then the skirt. Then the apron, which is the piece that marks you as what you are. The working apron, stiff along its lower edge with the ghost of dried lye, with a faint brown stain near the bottom hem that you have never been able to fully remove, which is the specific embarrassment of a professional laundress having a stain on her apron, and which you have decided simply to live with. Because what are the alternatives? The stain is from beeswax. Hortense knocked over a candle your first week and some of it splashed. These things happen. They happen to you and you wear the evidence. You tie your cap over your hair. Your hair is dark and there is a great deal of it, which means a moment's work tucking it in properly, because loose hair in the laundry catches on things, on the rough wooden frames of the drying racks, on the handles of the paddles, on the edges of the scrubbing tables, and once on a heavy wet sheet you were lifting that pulled you sideways hard enough that you bit your own tongue. You've kept your hair tucked in ever since, your coat, the wool one, your father's. It still smells like him if you press your nose against the collar and breathe very deliberately. The smell has faded. It was stronger at the beginning, but it's still there. Underneath the new smells this place has layered over it. Lye and coal smoke and wet wool and the particular smell of your own sweat, which is different now from what it was in the village because you use your body differently here. Use muscles you didn't know had their own smell. Shoes, wooden, rag-wrapped, one of them with a squeak in the left heel that worsens in cold weather. In November, the squeak is heroic. Squeak. Hortense stops snoring for exactly 2 seconds, then recommences at full intensity. The basin near the door has a skin of ice. You press your thumb against it and it gives immediately, cracks into small pieces that float in water cold enough to make your fingertips seize when you cup your hands and splash it on your face. But you do it anyway. Hortense told you in your first week that small dignities matter, that taking 30 seconds to wash your face in the morning means you are still the kind of person who washes her face, that you haven't let this place take that from you yet. You've thought about that sentence more times than you've thought about most things in the last 7 months. You've decided Hortense is right. The cold drips from your chin and soaks into your collar, and the cold goes through you like a blade, and you straighten up, and you are ready. Good morning, Versailles. The service corridors are a different building from the one the courtiers inhabit. This is literally true. The service quarter is a separate architectural reality. Wings and additions and underground passages threading through the palace complex like veins beneath skin. A hidden circulatory system that keeps the visible body alive. But you mean something beyond the architectural. You mean that the two worlds operate on different principles, run by different physics, populated by people who will never fully see each other. Up there, the Hall of Mirrors. 237 windows facing the gardens, 17 arched mirrors facing the windows, 20,000 candles on certain evenings, all of them burning at once, the whole thing blazing like something between a cathedral and a controlled fire. You've never been inside it. You've heard about it from Suzanne, who works in the linen press for the royal apartments, and occasionally moves through corridors close enough to the grand rooms to feel, through closed doors, the particular warmth of that many candles burning. Down here, stone floors, low ceilings, the smell of coal smoke and tallow and wet wool and lye, the last of which has soaked so deeply into the walls over the decades that it will be there long after every one of you is gone. The smell is part of the building now. The building has been saturated. The corridor from your dormitory to the main laundry, 217 steps, direct route, the route that avoids the uneven section near the wine cellars, where you have to watch your step in the dark. You have your candle stub from last night, not quite burned down, and the flame catches on the second strike of the flint and gives you approximately 18 inches of orange light in all directions. 18 inches is enough if you know the way. You know the way. You pass the storage rooms, you pass the stairs to the kitchen quarter, and from somewhere above comes the earliest evidence of the day's cooking. A smell of something beginning, of heat being applied to cold things, of the enormous machinery of feeding several hundred people starting its morning sequence. You pass the small room with the broken table. The broken table has been broken since August and is a modest ongoing injustice. It was used for sorting, and now sorting happens standing at a different table that is the wrong height, and everyone's back is slightly worse for it. But it remains broken because the man who fixes such things has been asked about it 5 times, and each time has indicated that he is aware of the situation. You have stopped asking. Madame Tremblay has not stopped asking, but her asking takes different forms and has different results, and you have privately decided that the table will be fixed sometime before spring. You push open the heavy door at the end of the corridor, the laundry. The smell is the first thing always. Lye, alkaline, sharp. The smell of something that knows it is caustic and doesn't particularly care. That you have inhaled so many times it has become as ordinary as bread smell, as barn smell, as the smell of your own coat. Underneath it, wet wool, the faint must of laundry that didn't fully dry yesterday and is sitting in the collection baskets waiting for today's attention. Underneath that, wood smoke from the furnaces, already waking, their heat radiating out from the far end of the room like something almost hospitable. The room itself, 30 feet wide, 50 feet long, with the furnaces at the southern end and the scrubbing tables running down the centre, and the sorting area at the northern end near the door. The ceiling is high enough that in summer the steam from the vats rises and collects above and creates its own weather. You've seen clouds form near the rafters on particularly heavy days, actual small clouds, and in November the steam billows across the middle of the room in waves. Geneviève is already here. She is always already here. You have never, in 7 months, arrived before Geneviève, and you suspect that if you arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning, you would still find her doing something useful at the furnaces and looking at you with the expression that she always uses when anyone arrives anywhere, which is an expression that contains the phrase, "I see you made it," without speaking a word. There is also a new girl in the corner. She arrived 3 weeks ago. She's possibly 14 and definitely not sleeping well enough, which is a statement that applies to all new arrivals and simply becomes less visually obvious over time. She's doing something with the sorting that you can see from across the room is not quite right. "Morning," you say. Genevieve does not look up from the furnace. "Late." You are not late. It is not yet 4 o'clock and the bells have not rung. You say nothing. 7 months. You know when to say nothing. You go to the sorting area, because the new girl has been touching the delivery and the delivery needs to be correct before anything else. And here is the thing about the delivery. Yesterday, a collection arrived from the royal apartments. The royal household generates an amount of soiled linen that is genuinely difficult to comprehend until you are the person responsible for cleaning it. The king alone, and you've had this explained to you, have had the specific economics of royal linen impressed upon you with the kind of thoroughness that Madame Tremblay applies to all information she considers essential. The king changes his shirt multiple times a day. His morning shirt removed after his morning ablutions, which are themselves a ceremony attended by courtiers who consider it an honour to hand the king his sleeve. His afternoon shirt changed before dinner. His evening shirt possibly changed again depending on what the evening contains. Shirts for a king are not shirts in the sense that your father's shirt is a shirt. Worn until it requires washing, washed, worn again. Shirts for the king are events. Each one is laundered, pressed, returned, worn for hours, returned. The ceremony of the clean shirt is part of the ceremony of kingship. It is not just shirts, sheets, changed with a frequency that would have struck your grandmother as incomprehensible, not weekly, not every few days, but with a regularity that generates a constant rolling river of linen that flows down through the service quarter to this room. Chemises for the ladies of court, some of them embroidered so finely along the edges that you sort them in good light, with your reading fingers as careful as a reader's. Stockings, dozens of pairs, linen and silk, handkerchiefs, tablecloths, napkins. At Versailles, the table linen alone from a single dinner could occupy half a morning's work. And cravats. Cravats. The pieces of linen folded and tied at a man's neck, which must be pressed and starched to a standard that is, and you are not inventing this, frightening. You have seen a man's cravat in incorrect order generate a complaint that found its way to Madame Tremblay, and through Madame Tremblay's face into the nervous systems of everyone in this room. You do not want to be responsible for a cravat complaint. You have structured your approach to cravats around the specific goal of never being responsible for a cravat complaint. The new girl, you will learn this morning that her name is Lisette, has been sorting the delivery by type. Shirts with shirts, sheets with sheets, small linens with small linens. This is the correct approach for ordinary laundry and the wrong one for this laundry, which must first be sorted by origin, by household, by the embroidered marking near the hem or cuff of each piece that tells you where it came from. What belongs to the royal apartments cannot go with what belongs to the prince's apartments. What belongs to the ladies in waiting is tracked separately from what belongs to the Queen's ladies. Mix the origins and you mix the identities, and you cannot return pieces to their correct locations. And you create the kind of problem that has multiple layers and several names attached to it, yours being one of them. You go to Lisette. "Come here." you say. She comes. She's frightened. Her eyes are doing the calculation that all new arrivals do, estimating the size of the error and whether the error is survivable. You didn't do this wrong, you say. You did it correctly for laundry that isn't this laundry. This laundry is different. And you show her. You show her the marking system, the coloured thread, the embroidered numbers, the way each piece carries its origin on its body, the same way each person in this building carries their status on theirs, visibly, specifically, decodable if you know the code. You explain that when a marking is worn or unclear, set it aside, do not guess. Wait for someone who knows. Never guess, you say. Guessing is how you end up with a problem that has your name on it. Lisette nods. She's trying very hard to remember everything. You were doing this same thing 7 months ago. You remember the feeling of trying to hold more information than your brain felt it had space for. The sense of constant inadequacy. That is the permanent condition of the first months of any new work. You don't say this. You nod at her and turn to your own pile, and your hands stop. Near the bottom of the delivery basket there is a sheet. You lift it out and hold it in the candlelight, and something cold moves through your chest. A stain, the size of both your hands together, near the centre of the sheet, where the centre lies when a bed is made. Dark, not wine. Wine spreads differently, has a purple edge, moves through linen in a particular radial pattern you know from long acquaintance. Not ink. Ink is blacker, more concentrated. Not food. Red-brown, already dried, the pattern of it. Darker in one area, lighter where it spread outward, the deepening in the centre where the fabric was most saturated, the way it has soaked through the layers unevenly, the specific darkness of it. Blood. Your hands are still. The sheet is very heavy. You look at the marking on the hem, royal apartments, the specific marking that means royal apartments. Not a prince's quarters, not a princess's suite, not the rooms of any of the dozens of duchesses and countesses who populate the upper floors. The specific mark of the rooms where the most observed, most documented, most politically significant person in France sleeps. You look around the room. Genevieve's back is to you. Lisette is focused on her resorting, tongue slightly between her teeth. The other women haven't arrived yet. You fold the sheet, quickly. The stain goes inside the fold. You set it in its own space, apart from the other piles. You put your hand on top of it. Your heart is doing something it probably shouldn't be doing before 4 a.m. The laundry room is full of the ordinary sounds of a morning beginning. The furnace settling, steam beginning to move, Genevieve's quiet adjustments to the vats. And underneath all of that, your heart is being less than entirely professional about this sheet. There are things that royal laundresses know, and things that they keep knowing, very quietly. You wait for Madame Tremblay. She arrives at 4:15, as always, walking with the forward tilt of someone who has been hurrying for 30 years, and has decided that the angle is simply how she moves. She is small. This always surprises new workers. Her physical smallness and her presence in a room occupy approximately twice the distance from each other that you would expect. Her eyes do the circuit. Tables, vats, drying frames, sorting area. 15 seconds. She misses nothing. Then she sees the sheet. Not because it's obvious. Because Madame Tremblay notices things that are in the wrong place, and the sheet is in a specific wrong place. Separated from the other piles with your hand on top of it, which is the physical equivalent of a sentence that ends with a question that you're not sure you should be asking. What is that? Not a question. I found it in the delivery, you say. I set it aside. I thought you should see it first. She walks to it. Her walk across the room is controlled, even, revealing nothing. She shakes out the sheet with the snap of someone who's been unfolding laundry longer than you've been alive and looks. She looks at the stain. She looks at the marking. She refolds the sheet. The fold is crisp, exact, very precise. You found it in the delivery, she says. Yes, madame. Anyone else see this? No, madame. She holds the folded sheet for a moment. Her face does nothing readable. This goes first. Cold water, not vat water. Cold first, then warm. No beating. You do it. Not the new girl, not anyone else. You do it. And when it's done, it's done. You understand me? Yes, madame. The marking. She doesn't continue. She sets the sheet on your personal pile. The pile that means you handle it yourself, and walks away. Her back is the end of the conversation. You stand with your hand on the sheet and practice breathing normally. What laundresses know and keep knowing quietly, linen tells the truth even when people don't. The cold water comes first. This is not counterintuitive once you understand fabric. Heat sets stains, bonds them into the fibre, makes them permanent, transforms what was a temporary mark into a permanent one. Cold lifts. Cold keeps the fibre open and loose and willing to release what it's absorbed. Genevieve told you this in your first week, followed it with a demonstration involving white linen and red wine that taught you more than any explanation could. You carry the sheet, folded, arm's length careful, not so much as corner dragging, to the cold water trough on the northern wall. The trough is fed by a pipe from the pump outside, and in November the water that comes from it is genuinely cold, cold that has a presence to it, that you can feel on your hands from an inch away before you touch the surface. You lower the sheet in. Linen floats when it's dry. You have to work it under with your hands, pushing the cold water up through the weave, feeling the fabric go from stiff to soft to deeply soaked. Your hands go numb within 3 minutes. You don't particularly notice this anymore. This is the level of cold your hands live at from November through February. They hurt differently now than at the beginning. Less surface, more deep, a joint ache rather than a skin sting. Genevieve says it gets better by the 3rd or 4th year. You're 7 months in and have approximately 40 months of this specific cold ahead of you. You work the water through the sheet slowly without rubbing. The water around your hands turns faintly pink. You press and release, press and release. The pink clouds outward and dissipates. You change the water. The second pass, much paler. The third, barely a shadow of colour, and only visible if you hold the wet linen up to a good light source and tilt it slightly. You squeeze the water out, both hands gripping the wet linen and rotating against each other, the motion your body does without your mind being involved at this point, the water cascading into the trough, and carry the sheet to Genevieve's vat. The contrast when you lower your hands into the vat water is almost violent, even through the numbness, even through all those months of calibrating your hands to cold. The warmth of the vat is something close to relief. For a moment the ache in your joints is replaced by something that is close enough to comfort that you have to be careful not to stay too long, because lye water and comfort are not a combination that ends well for skin. You move the sheet through the vat. Long, slow passes with the paddle, turning the linen on itself within the water, working the alkaline solution through every fibre. The ghost of the stain, you watch it as you work. In the heat of the vat, the pale shadow that survived the cold water diminishes further. You watch it go. You try not to think about what it was. By 6 o'clock the laundry is fully awake and running at the pace that it runs for the next 9 or 10 hours, constant, loud, physically unrelenting. Genevieve managing 3 vats of different temperatures for different types of linen. You and Catherine and Agnès at the scrubbing tables, working through the morning load with brushes and soap and the arm-burning effort of press and scrub, press and scrub. Lisette hauling water, 2 buckets at a time, each one weighing, when full, approximately what a small determined child weighs, back and forth from the pump. 2 other women. You still don't know their names, though you're going to learn them today by the time the morning is half over, on the drying side, carrying the wrung pieces from the tables to the frames, laying them out flat, managing the ropes and the airflow, and the complicated spatial organisation of getting dozens of large pieces of wet linen into positions where they can actually dry. And the noise, always the noise. The scrubbing has its own rhythm, the slap and scrape of bristles against the wooden boards, and after an hour of it, the rhythm settles into you and you stop hearing it separately. It becomes part of the texture of the day, the same way your own heartbeat is part of the texture of being alive. The splash of the vats, the heavy soft sound of wet linen being lifted and moved, an intimate sound like something large and quiet turning over. The hiss of steam against the air, the crackle of the furnaces, under all of it the voices, not loud, not conversation exactly, the ongoing low exchange of women who spend 10 hours a day in the same room and have reached the level of familiarity where communication operates somewhere between speech and silence. Agnès, next to you at the table, is talking about her sister's husband and the vineyard that was going to be different this year. The vineyard that has been going to be different for 4 consecutive years. He said, "This year is the year," Agnès says, her brush moving in circles. "He's said this since we were 17. What does your sister say?" She says yes, and she says we'll see, and she hangs the washing and feeds the children, and the vineyard is the same. Agnès's brush moves slightly harder for a moment. It won't be different. Maybe it will. Maybe pigs will fly in formation over the palace, and the king will run out to look at them and fall in the reflecting pool. Something moves through you that isn't quite a laugh but shares its warmth. The scrubbing table is chest high. This is not an accident. Madame Tremblay ensured the tables were at the right height, which is the kind of gift you understand only when someone describes the alternative. Kneeling at a river bank for hours, bending over tables built without consideration of the body that has to bend. Madame Tremblay is a person who knows where all the very small cruelties are, and has eliminated some of them from this room, which makes her difficult qualities easier to navigate. This shirt you're working right now is from a household official, not royal. The collar is ringed with the greyish build-up of days, skin and sweat and the accumulation of living embedded in the weave. You work the soap block directly against the collar and then the brush. Press, rotate, press, rotate. The collar begins to lift. The water on your board goes grey-tinged. You pour fresh water from the bucket at your feet. Rinse, look, brush again. This is satisfying. You didn't expect it to be satisfying. You came here not out of love for laundry, but because your uncle's neighbour knew someone at the household administration, and there was a place, and your family needed money sent home. You were not consulted about whether you would enjoy the work. But there is something in this, in the collar going from grey to white under your hands, in the specific small victory of it, that you find genuinely satisfying, and you've thought about why that might be, and you think it has something to do with evidence. The work leaves evidence, At the end of the day, things are visibly cleaner than they were at the beginning. In a life that otherwise offers very few visible results, this counts for something. Madame Tremblay returns at 7 o'clock, the door opening in its particular controlled way. Everyone's back straightens fractionally. "Morning delivery from the Princess Apartments," she says. 12 shirts, 9 pairs of stockings, 17 handkerchiefs, 4 cravats, 1 tablecloth that has been involved in red wine, and a decision made without consideration of consequences. Catherine makes a small sound that is not quite a word. "I know," Madame Tremblay says. She scans the room. The blue thread sheets need to be done by the afternoon pressing. There are guests this evening. She leaves. Guests this evening. These 2 words change the weight of the morning like adding stones to a scale. Guests at Versailles means people who know what royal linen looks like from other great houses, people who notice the specific texture of pressed linen, the particular whiteness that good bleaching produces, the precise stiffness of correctly starched cravat ends. Guess means that today's work will be assessed by eyes that don't usually see it and will judge by standards that are difficult to articulate exactly because they are felt before they are named. You look at your pile, then at the vats, then at Agnès, who has looked at you, and then at the pile, and then at the day ahead, and given a very small nod that means she understands what this morning is going to be. You pick up your brush. At 8:30, you eat. Eating in the laundry happens in a specific and somewhat unglamorous way. A woman comes from the kitchen with a basket containing bread, and, if the morning's going well, something else. Sometimes a piece of cheese, sometimes a bit of ham that is toward the end of its useful life but still entirely edible, sometimes nothing. The bread comes in rounds, dense and slightly grey, the kind of bread that is made for people who need to be fueled rather than pleased, and you've been eating it for 7 months and have stopped having opinions about it. You eat standing at the edge of the room near the drying frames because sitting down and getting up again takes more time and energy than standing. You eat quickly. The bread is filling, if not warm, and you wash it down with a cup of small beer, low alcohol, the drink that everyone at every level of this building consumes because the water is unreliable, and small beer is at least unlikely to give you something that will kill you. And when you're done, you wipe your hands on your apron, which is already past caring about one more thing, and you go back to the tables. Your hands have warmed slightly. The period around the vats, the steam, the warm water of the soapy rinse. Your hands go from numb to something approaching functional over the course of the morning, and by mid-morning they feel almost ordinary, if ordinary is a word that can be applied to hands that have cracks on top of cracks, and a redness that will not entirely go away regardless of the weather. You have, in the last few months, developed a system. For the worst cracks, the ones that open and bleed when you flex your fingers, you apply a small amount of lard in the evenings, rubbing it into the skin before sleep. Hortense told you about this. The lard smells terrible and makes the bedding slightly problematic. But the alternative is hands that bleed constantly into whatever linen you're handling, which is a different and more professionally serious problem. You prioritize the professional problem. The laird stays. By 10 o'clock, the large blue thread sheets, the ones Madame Tremblay specifically indicated, are through the vats and into the first rinse. These are the guest sheets, the ones that need to be impeccable, and Geneviève has given them her personal attention, which means they have been boiled at precisely the right temperature for precisely the right amount of time, and the colour coming off them in the rinse water is the very pale blue of properly clean linen. Almost no colour at all. the colour of almost white. You take them to the ringing frame, a wooden structure with a central post and handles that allow two women to twist the linen around the post and extract an impressive amount of water. And you and Catherine work the frame together, the rhythm of it established over months of doing this exact thing together. Catherine on the left handle, you on the right, turning, the water cascading down into the drain channel below, the sheet getting progressively heavier to turn as the water content drops, until you're both leaning into the handles with your full body weight, and the sheet is making the tight squeaking sound of linen that's lost most of its water, but wants to keep the last of it. "Done," Catherine says. You both step back. The sheet hangs on the post, no longer dripping. Wrung linen has its own particular weight, still damp but holding itself together, willing to be moved. You carry it, arms out, keeping it off the floor, to the drying frames. In summer, drying happens outside on the grass in sunlight. Laid out on the bleaching lawn behind the laundry complex, the white linen dries under direct sun, and the sun bleaches as it dries. This is not incidental. This is the mechanism, the ultraviolet light doing the work that no amount of soap can fully replicate, producing the final depth of whiteness that is the actual end goal of all this morning's effort. The sun bleaches. This is what you've been working towards since 4 o'clock. In November, the sun is less cooperative. In November, drying happens inside on the frames, which means drying takes longer, and the final result is somewhat less white than summer output. And this is a fact that Madame Tremblay is aware of and has opinions about but cannot change because it is November. You spread the sheet on the frame, smoothing it as you go, working the wet fabric into an even surface. This matters. Linen that dries with folds in it dries with those folds semi-permanent, and then the pressing has more work to do, and pressing always has enough work to do without the fabric arriving pre-complicated. Your hands move over the surface of the sheet, stretching and smoothing. The linen is cool and heavy and faintly rough under your fingers. Wet linen has a specific texture, neither the crisp roughness of dry linen nor the smoothness of silk, but something between. The fibres slightly softened by the water, the weave visible to the touch. You wonder sometimes whose bed this sheet was on. You know from the marking which apartment it goes back to. You know the name attached to that apartment the way everyone in France knows that name. Everyone in Europe, probably. Everyone who pays attention to the map of power and where the centre of it currently is. You've never seen that apartment. You've never been to that floor of the palace. You handle the evidence of that life, the linen, the intimacy of it, the evidence of sleeping and sweating and existing that clings to fabric, without ever seeing the person who produced it. The person who exists, in your experience, entirely as laundry. This is what it is to be invisible in a building full of important people. You're not a witness to their lives. You're a maintenance function, a part of the system that keeps the system running, unseen, as foundational and unremarked as the drainage channels in the floor. You smooth the final corner of the sheet and step back. Behind you, Lisette arrives with the next armload of wrung linen, slightly out of breath, her shoulders already showing the specific fatigue of water hauling, that particular rounding forward that sets in after the 3rd or 4th hour of carrying heavy things. She's too young to have the posture problems that come later. Right now, she's just tired. "The rinse water," Genevieve says from somewhere near the vats without looking up. Lisette looks at you. She means the rinse vat needs to be replenished, you tell her. "Second vat from the left. Fill it from the cold pump, then tell her when it's done." Lisette goes. You watch her go. 7 months ago, someone had this exact conversation with you, probably while also watching you with the specific expression of someone slightly senior, translating the language of the place for someone who doesn't speak it yet. You wonder if you have that expression now. You think probably yes. There is a sound at the door, not the ordinary sound of someone entering. Madame Tremblay has her own sound. The other women have theirs. Geneviève never comes to the door because she never leaves the vats in the morning. This is a different sound. The sound of someone who doesn't often come to this door. A man steps in. He is not a servant in the laundry. His clothes tell you this immediately, though his clothes are not particularly grand. He's in a plain dark coat, knee breeches, stockings, a wig that is serviceable rather than fashionable. He works in the household somewhere, not the upper reaches of it, not anyone with a title, but high enough that his shoes are of good leather, and he has the bearing of someone accustomed to not explaining himself when he goes places. He speaks to Madame Tremblay. You cannot hear most of what he says. You catch the morning collection, and particularly, and Madame Tremblay's attention is required. And then he says something quietly, close to her ear, and Madame Tremblay's face does a thing you've never seen it do before. She goes still, not the stillness of attention, the stillness of someone who has received information and is deciding very rapidly what to do with it. Then she says clearly, "Yes, I'll see to it personally." The man leaves. Madame Tremblay turns and her eyes find you immediately and directly across the room in a way that would be flattering under different circumstances. "Come," she says, "you go." She takes you to the small office at the back of the laundry, a room you've been in 4 times in 7 months, twice on arrival, once when the complaint about the cravat required a formal discussion, and once when Geneviève needed a decision about a water supply issue, and Madame Tremblay was the decision-maker. The office is small and cold and contains a desk, 2 chairs, a row of pegs with various organisational lists hanging from them, and a locked cabinet that you've never seen opened. She closes the door. "The sheet," she says. "Yes, madam." "You'll tell no one?" "I haven't." "No one. Not Agnès, not Hortense, not the girl whose name I haven't learned yet, not the woman at the pressing room, not anyone who asks, not even if they tell you they've been told by someone who has authority over me. You understand why I'm saying that specifically. You do understand, because people use the idea of authority to extract information, and information extracted under false authority is still extracted. Because they might be lying, you say. Because they might be lying. And because some information is more dangerous than whatever inconvenience you would suffer from keeping it. A pause. "The sheet is clean," Madame Tremblay says. This is not a question. Almost. There's a shadow, but only in strong direct light. She thinks for a moment. Then the sheet goes to the press first thing tomorrow. Pressed while damp, very hot iron. The shadow, if any remains, will be in the centre of a pressed sheet. She means, will be hidden by the folds of how a made bed lies. Will be invisible to any eye that isn't looking specifically for it. If anyone asks, and they won't ask you, they'll ask me, a sheet from that apartment showed evidence of a nosebleed. This is not a remarkable occurrence. No, madame. Is it remarkable to you? You think about what she's actually asking. Nosebleeds happen, you say. Madame Tremblay looks at you for a moment with the expression of someone assessing whether they've told the right person the right amount. Whatever she concludes, she nods, once. "Go back to work," she says. "You go back to work. You are 18 years old and you have just been told a thing that is not a thing by a woman who is protecting you by not telling you what the thing is, and the correct response to this, the response that keeps you employed and safe and in possession of a position that sends money home every month, is to pick up your brush and return to the collar you were working when you were called away. The collar is still there, still grey along the neckline, still waiting. You pick up your brush, press, rotate, press, rotate. The morning continues. At 11 o'clock the pressing room sends word that they're ready to begin receiving. This is the signal that the first section of the morning's output, the pieces that were first into the vats, first through the rinse, should begin moving up the service staircase to the room where the flat irons live. The pressing room is on the floor above. You've been up there perhaps a dozen times, carrying loads, collecting loads, passing through. The room is longer than the laundry and lower ceilinged, and on any active day it is the hottest room in the service quarter, not because of any furnace, but because of the irons. The flat iron is a simple object that contains a remarkable amount of physics. Cast iron, several pounds each, with a handle attached at an angle. You heat it on the coals. You test it on a piece of damp linen, not the good linen, the test piece, and if it produces a brown mark, the iron is too hot. If it skids rather than glides, it's too cool. The window of correct temperature is narrower than you'd like, and the iron loses heat quickly once away from the coals, which means a constant rotation. Iron working, second iron heating, first iron back to the coals when it's cooled, second iron out, and so on, back and forth. Your arms moving in a rhythm between the hearth and the board and the hearth, for as long as the pile of linen requires. The ironing is different work from the scrubbing. It requires a different part of your attention, more forward directed, more focused on the immediate surface, the specific response of this particular piece of fabric to this particular temperature of iron. Bad scrubbing means the linen isn't clean. Bad ironing means the linen is burned, marked, ruined, unsalvageable. Bad ironing ends careers. You've seen, in 7 months, 2 women leave the pressing room under circumstances that involved ironing errors and replacement costs and a meeting with Madame Tremblay's face. You are careful with the irons. You're more careful than you need to be for your current level of work, because the pieces you iron at the moment are not the most important ones. But careful is a habit, and you have decided that habits matter. The cravats are the hardest. A man's cravat is about 18 inches long and 3 inches wide when finished, and it is starched to a specific stiffness, and it is pressed so that it lies in a precise way when tied, and the ends must fall at exactly the right angle. And none of this is as simple as it sounds when you're holding a 6-pound iron over fabric that cost more per yard than your monthly wage. You go slowly. You check the iron temperature twice as often. You think about nothing except the surface of the fabric and the motion of the iron, and the point at which done is done and not done yet is not done yet. Today's cravat, when you've finished, is correct. You hold it up in the window light. White, crisp, the ends at the right angle, the body without a wrinkle. You set it in the finished pile. You pick up the next one. Somewhere above you, several floors in rooms you'll never see from the inside. This cravat will be worn by someone who won't notice it unless it's wrong. This is fine. This is in some ways the point. At noon, Lisette appears in the pressing room doorway looking for you. Madame Tremblay says to come when you're done with the current piece. You finish the shirt collar you're working on, check the iron temperature, set the iron on the rest, and go. Madame Tremblay is in the laundry with a woman you haven't seen before. The woman is older, perhaps 50, and dressed in the clothes of someone upper servant. the kind of upper servant who serves the upper household directly, who has daily access to people who have daily access to the king. You know what this kind of clothing means. You've learned to read it. The quality of the fabric, the cut of the bodice, the way she holds herself in a room that clearly strikes her as a room she's usually far above. She's looking at you. Madame Tremblay says, "This is the woman I mentioned. She found it, set it aside, told no one." The woman looks at you for another moment. Her face is reading you the way Madame Tremblay reads laundry, looking for something specific, checking for damage. "Good," she says. Then she says to you directly, "You did exactly right. Anyone asks, a nosebleed, nothing more." "Yes, madame." She leaves. Madame Tremblay watches her go. Then she turns to you with an expression that is, you think, as close to warmth as her face produces. "Well," she says, "go get your dinner." You eat dinner in the small room adjacent to the laundry, where there is a table that is the correct height and a bench, and today there is a stew that contains actual meat in recognizable pieces, which is not always the case, and which you receive with a gratitude that is entirely sincere. Agnès is already there. Catherine arrives. The new woman, whose name you learn when Madame Tremblay says it in passing, is Victoire, which is somehow exactly the right name for someone who does laundry 14 hours a day, comes in last and sits at the end of the bench and eats without speaking, which you've already come to understand is her normal state and not a sign of unfriendliness. Agnès is telling you something about her morning. Something went wrong with the stockings. A pair of silk stockings that had a catch in them when they arrived, a pulled thread, and the question was whether the pull happened at the laundry or before, and this question has significant professional implications that you understand immediately. Geneviève says it happened before, Agnès says. Did it? How would I know? It was already pulled when I looked at it. What does Madame Tremblay say? Madame Tremblay says to write it down and note the condition on arrival. This is the correct answer. Writing it down on arrival means the record exists. The record is protection. Then that's what you do, you say. Agnès stirs her stew. Do you think they care? Do you think anyone up there actually checks the record when something goes wrong? You consider this. I think someone might, someday, for something that matters enough. And until then we just write it down and hope. And until then we write it down and hope. The stew is good. The bread that came with it is less good, but there is a lot of it. You eat everything. You've eaten everything at every meal since you arrived, because the work requires it, because the laundry burns through you like a furnace, and if you underfuel, you feel it in the afternoon, in your arms and your back, and the specific tiredness that comes from using your body hard, and you've stopped having complicated feelings about eating large amounts and started simply eating. After dinner, there is the afternoon. The afternoon is in some ways harder than the morning. The morning has the energy of beginning, the sense of a full day ahead. The afternoon has the accumulated weight of the morning already behind it, in your arms and your shoulders, and the particular ache in the lower back that comes from standing at a scrubbing table since before dawn. By 2 o'clock you've been on your feet for 10 hours, and the day has at least another 4 hours to give. You go back to the pressing room. The pile waiting for you is substantial. The guest linens, the blue thread sheets, now pressed by Suzanne, who has more experience with the very good linens, are done. What remains for you is the ordinary pressing, which is not actually ordinary, but is ordinary relative to guest linens, which is a distinction that gets finer the longer you work here. Shirts, several handkerchiefs, the troublesome tablecloth from the prince's apartments, which has survived the wash remarkably well, the wine stain significantly diminished, and which you approach with the 2-iron method and considerable care. The tablecloth is large. You work from one end, the iron moving in broad, sweeping strokes across the weave, the steam rising as the damp linen meets the hot iron and releases its moisture into the air. The smell of hot linen is distinct from all the other smells in this building. Clean and slightly mineral, the smell of heat applied to something clean, of the last water being driven out by heat. At one point, in the middle of the tablecloth, you hit a section that has a barely visible mark. Not the wine stain, that's gone, or near enough. This is something else, a slight shadow in the weave, lighter than the rest. You hold the iron just above it, generating steam, and the shadow lightens further. You pass the iron very gently, just enough heat, and check. Gone. You continue. By 3 o'clock, you're aware that your feet have stopped sending reliable reports. This is a late afternoon phenomenon, not quite pain, more the absence of normal feeling, a kind of muted protest from feet that have been on stone floors since before dawn and have expressed their opinions and been overruled so many times that they've given up on normal sensation and moved to something more ambient. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, which helps for about 30 seconds at a time. Genevieve, you once asked, does it ever stop hurting? Genevieve said, you stop noticing. You're not sure those are the same thing. At 4 o'clock, Lisette comes to tell you that Madame Tremblay is asking whether the main pressing is nearly done. Tell her nearly, you say. Lisette goes. You work through the last 4 shirts in the pile, checking each collar, checking each cuff, making sure the iron isn't developing the hot spots that a cooling iron produces in its last working minutes. The last shirt goes onto the done pile. You call for Lisette to carry it downstairs. And then Madame Tremblay, when she comes to check the finished pile, looks at it for a moment and says, take yourself outside for an hour before we start the evening sort. You look at her. You've been in here since before 4 this morning, she says. Go outside, come back at the bell. This is extraordinary. This is so far outside the normal pattern of the day that you spend a moment simply staring at her, waiting for the second part of the sentence. There is no second part. She turns back to the pile and you understand that the conversation is over and the hour is yours. You get your coat from the peg by the laundry door. Your coat that smells like home if you press your face into the collar. You put it on and go out. The door opens onto the cobbled yard. The air hits you. Cold, sharp, November air, real air, actual outdoor air, with the smell of cold stone and the distant smell of horses from the stables on the other side of the complex, and somewhere in it the faint smell of something green, something leafy, that is so unexpected in November that you stop in the middle of the yard and simply breathe for a moment. The sky is doing something interesting. There is a break in the clouds that have been everywhere all day, the November clouds that seal the sky shut and make the light inside the laundry yellow and dim. And through the break in the late afternoon there is actual sun. The low flat sun of late autumn that comes in at an angle and turns everything it touches gold, that makes the wet cobblestones of the yard shine, that touches the top of the garden wall on the far side and makes the stone look like something valuable. You stand in the cold and the sun and breathe. The yard is nearly empty at this hour. A kitchen boy crosses it with a basket, moving quickly, his eyes down. 2 men you don't recognise are talking near the gate on the far side, their voices low, their conversation clearly not meant to be heard. A cat, one of the yard cats, the half-wild ones that keep the rodent population in the service quarter from becoming something that would require a more formal response, moves along the base of the far wall with a hunter's specific purposefulness. You walk to the gate in the garden wall. The gate is low, wooden, latched, but not locked. You've passed it dozens of times without going through it. Today you lift the latch and push through. The garden. You stop 3 steps through the gate. The garden of Versailles, not the grand formal gardens, not the place that appears in every illustration and engraving that has ever been made of this palace, but the kitchen garden, the service garden, the working garden at the edge of the service quarter that feeds the kitchen and is otherwise largely forgotten by anyone above the service level. In summer, it's a working thing, full of vegetables in their ordered rows. In November, it's stripped back, the beds turned over, waiting for spring. But there are still some things living in it. There are espaliered apple trees against the south-facing wall, their branches bare now, trained flat against the stone. The wall's warmth allowing the apples to ripen later than they would otherwise. There are a few hardy herbs in pots along the path. There is a path itself, of raked gravel, still raked even in November, because some things are maintained as a matter of principle regardless of whether anyone uses them, and at the far end of the garden there is a bench. You walk to it. The gravel shifts under your wooden shoes. The squeak of the left heel is somewhat less dramatic outdoors, muffled by the open air, and the cold of the metal bench comes through your coat immediately when you sit, but you don't care. From here, from this bench, in the low November sun, you can see the palace, not the front of it, not the grand facade that faces the approach road, the one that visitors see when they arrive, the enormous statement of power and architecture that the king commissioned specifically to declare something to anyone approaching. From here you can see one wing of the palace at an angle, a long low building running perpendicular to your line of sight, its stone turned amber by the late sun, its windows, there are hundreds of them, catching the light and throwing it back in long horizontal lines. You've been inside this building for 7 months. You've walked its service corridors thousands of times. You've touched its linen. You know the smell of its lower levels, the precise weight of its doors, the sound of its bells. You've never properly looked at it from outside. It's very large. You know this, of course. You've always known this. But knowing something and understanding it are different processes, and what you understand, sitting on this cold bench in the service garden with the late sun on your face, is that this building is not simply large the way a big church is large or a market is large. This building is large in the way that geological formations are large. It is the shape of a decision made at an enormous scale, a decision that said, here, in this specific place, everything will be about size, about spectacle, about the visible assertion that what exists here is bigger and more significant than anything anywhere else. And underneath that assertion, the laundry, the kitchen, the storage rooms, the dormitories where women sleep 7 to a room and wake before dawn and have hands that are old before their bodies are. The building needs both. The spectacle needs the laundry. The Hall of Mirrors needs the women whose hands made the sheets white. But it does not need to know their names. You think about the sheet this morning, the folded sheet, and Madame Tremblay's face, and the woman in the upper servant's dress who said you did exactly right. The thing that is not a thing. The truth that linen tells even when people don't. Somewhere in that building, the rooms that generated that sheet are full of people who operate at the level of events and decisions and power. People whose daily lives produce the kind of evidence you handle without seeing the person it came from. There is a gap between those lives and yours that is so large and so structural and so completely unremarkable to everyone in this yard that you barely have the language to articulate it, except to note that it exists, that you live entirely on one side of it, and that crossing it is approximately as likely as the pigs flying over the reflecting pool. This is not a sad thought. You've thought about this before, in the evenings, in the dormitory, in the half hour before sleep. That is the only time your brain isn't occupied with the immediate demands of the work. You've decided it is simply the shape of the world you live in, and that the shape of the world you live in does not prevent you from eating well, sleeping adequately, sending money home every month, and finding something like satisfaction in the collar going from grey to white under your hands. This is enough. It is enough for now. The bell rings somewhere in the service wing. 1 hour. You stand, brush the cold of the bench off the back of your coat, and walk back across the garden. The cat on the wall watches you go. The evening sort is exactly what it sounds like. Sorting through everything that has been cleaned and pressed today, cross-checking against the original delivery marks, making sure every piece is going back to its correct apartment, its correct household, its correct position in the palace's taxonomy of important people. This sounds tedious. It is not entirely untedious, but it is necessary, and the necessity gives it a structure that is almost satisfying. You work through the pile with Madame Tremblay, because the evening sort is one of the moments when she's directly present, checking, verifying, making the final calls on anything that was ambiguous during the day. She goes through the pieces quickly, her fingers reading the markings with a speed that reflects her years of this work. A nod for yes, a slight frown for something that needs another look. The rare thing set to one side for tomorrow rather than return tonight. The blue thread sheets go into the delivery basket for the guest apartments. Madame Tremblay holds each one up to the lamplight and looks at it, and each one is correct, white, pressed, without fault, and she puts each one in the basket without comment. The absence of comment is the comment. The cravats go in their own small basket, very carefully folded in tissue paper that Madame Tremblay cuts from a roll, specifically for this purpose. The cravats are always in tissue paper. The first time you saw this, you thought it excessive. Now you understand that the tissue paper is what stands between you and the alternative, which is a cravat that shifts in the basket and arrives at its destination with a fold in the wrong place, and you would rather cut tissue paper for the rest of your working life than face that alternative. Near the bottom of the day's finished pile, you reach the large sheet, the one from this morning. It is white, perfectly white. The pressing has done its work. Whatever ghost of the cold water treatment remained after the vat has been driven out by the heat of the iron. You hold it up to the lamp and tilt it, the way you'd check for any remaining shadow, and you see nothing. Nothing. Just the white of well-cleaned linen. Madame Tremblay is beside you. She looks at it. She looks at the marking. She folds it herself, carefully, and places it in the correct basket. There, she says. That's all. There. The delivery baskets go out at 7 o'clock, carried by the boys who move laundry through the service corridors at the beginning and end of each day. Efficient and anonymous, the circulation of clean linen through the body of the palace. You watch them go. By 7:30, the laundry is in its evening state, the furnaces banked down for the night, the vats emptied and drying, the scrubbing tables cleared, the floor swept. The room without its working noise is a different space. larger somehow, emptier. The steam and the sound and the constant human activity that fill it during the day, having created an environment that their absence makes slightly surreal. You do the final sweep of the floor. Your arms ache. Your lower back is doing the specific thing it does in the last hour of the day. A deep pull on the left side where you favour it without meaning to. Your feet have graduated from muted protest to something that is definitively the word tired, as applied to the soles of feet, a sensation you've learned to ignore until you can sit down. Genevieve is banking the last furnace. She moves around it with the careful economy of motion that is her signature. Nothing wasted, nothing unnecessary. Every action exactly what the task requires, and nothing more. You've watched her for 7 months, and she has taught you more than she's said, which is characteristic. Genevieve is a woman who teaches by being seen doing things correctly. Good day, you say. It's not a question. She considers. Productive. This is high praise from Genevieve. You carry your broom to the corner peg and put on your coat and pick up your candle stub. A new one from the box near the door, taller than this morning's, and you leave the laundry, the corridor. 217 steps, the direct route, the broken table, the stairs where the kitchen smell is different now. The smell of a large meal recently completed rather than a large meal in preparation. A richer, heavier smell. The smell of aftermath. Your room. Hortense is already there, lying on her back on the pallet, still in her working clothes, her eyes open. You went outside today, she says without looking at you. Madame Tremblay gave me an hour. I know, Genevieve told me. First time since August. Is it? You don't notice things when you're in it. You only notice from outside. You sit on your side of the pallet and pull off your shoes. The squeak of the left heel in the confines of the room is very loud in the relative silence. What did you do with it? Hortense asks. The hour. Sat in the garden, looked at the building. Hortense turns her head to look at you. And? It's very large. A pause. Then Hortense makes the sound she makes when she finds something genuinely funny, which is less a laugh than a warm expulsion of breath. It's very large, she repeats. 7 months, and that's your conclusion. I also thought about things. What things? You consider what to say. Not the sheet. Never the sheet. Madame Tremblay's instruction was absolute, and instructions from Madame Tremblay are treated as geography. But the other things, the garden, the sun, the gap between the world above and the world below. About what we're part of, you say. Whether it means anything. Hortense looks at the ceiling. It means what it means, she says, which is the kind of answer that is either very wise or entirely evasive, and you've been here long enough to know that with Hortense it's usually both. The guests tonight, you say, the sheets we pressed, those are real, those matter to someone. Everything we touch is real. Everything we touch matters to someone, or it wouldn't get washed. She shifts on the pallet. The question is whether they know it matters to someone. They don't. No, they don't. She closes her eyes. Get some sleep. You lie down without undressing, the same as every night. The blanket is thin. It is always thin. The blankets in the service quarter are supplied without apparent consideration of November. And you pull it to your chin and lie still, and listen to the building around you. The building at night has its own sound. During the day, the service quarter is all purpose and motion, the noise of people doing necessary things at necessary speeds. At night, the building settles, there is still movement. There are night workers, and the kitchens never entirely stop. And there are always people awake somewhere in a building with 40,000 inhabitants. But the quality of the sound changes. It becomes something more like breathing, like the building itself inhaling and pausing. You think about the morning, the dark, the cold basin, the cracked ice, the water so cold it stings, the walk through the corridor, the laundry door opening and the smell arriving before anything else, the sheet. You've kept this today. You've held it correctly, told no one, done what was needed. You have been trusted with something, and you have trusted yourself to handle it, and you have not been wrong. This is a small thing, but small things accumulate. You think about Madame Tremblay saying, "Go outside." You think about the garden, the bench, the late sun on the amber stone, the building seen from outside after 7 months of seeing it only from within. The understanding that you work inside something enormous, and that its enormousness is not your enormousness, but that you are part of the machinery of it. That your hands, your old before their time hands, cracked, lie-burned, capable now of reading the quality of linen by touch, the way a literate person reads a page, your hands are part of what makes the enormous thing go. The cravat you pressed today. Someone at this evening's dinner will be wearing it, its ends falling at exactly the right angle. They won't know your name. They'll never know your name. But the cravat is correct, and correctness of that specific kind is your work, and your work is real whether or not anyone sees it. Hortense is snoring. Not yet at full volume. The early snoring, which is almost quiet, which is almost a kind of sound sleep makes before it decides to be more committed about itself. Your eyes are heavy. The day's work has settled into you the way it always does by this hour. Deep in the body, in the muscles, in the specific weight of limbs that have moved continuously for 15 hours. The cold is still there, ambient, but it has become familiar enough that it feels less like a condition and more like a constant companion. Tomorrow will begin at 4 o'clock. Perhaps earlier, if the delivery's large. There will be linen to sort and linen to wash and linen to press, and the water will be cold and the iron will be heavy, and your hands will hurt the way they always hurt, and by noon your feet will have sent their first protest about the stone floor. You know this. You know it completely. And it is all right. It is the shape of the days, and you are slowly becoming the shape of someone who can live inside these days without being diminished by them. The candle on the floor gutters in a draught from somewhere. The room goes almost dark. Outside, in the service yards and the corridors and the kitchens and the stables and the night rooms of 40,000 people, Versailles continues. It never stops entirely. It is a machine that the king designed and that the king's household maintains, and that women like you in rooms like this keep clean and functional. The sheets are pressed. The cravats are correct. The stain that is not a thing is not a thing. The machine runs. You did your part of it. Your eyes close. Sleep is not a long time coming. It never is after days like this. It moves through you the way the hot vat water moved through the linen this morning. Comprehensive, thorough, reaching every part of you and releasing the tension in every part of you, loosening the day's grip. You're 18 years old. You've been here 7 months. You know things you didn't know 7 months ago. How to read a marking on a hem. How to test water temperature with your elbow. How to negotiate the difference between what Madame Tremblay says and what Madame Tremblay means. How to wring water from a sheet so completely that Geneviève doesn't have to say anything, which is the specific measure of competence that Geneviève recognizes. How to press a cravat so that its ends fall correctly. how to keep something that needs to be kept. Tomorrow you will wake up in the dark and your hands will tell you so before your eyes open. The basin will be cold, the corridor will be dark, the laundry door will open onto the smell of lye and steam and wood smoke, the smell that has become so ordinary to you that you've stopped smelling it consciously and simply breathe it the way you breathe the rest of air, and you will begin again. This is not a tragedy. It is not exactly a triumph. It is a life, being lived in the specific way available to you, in the specific place where you've been placed, with the specific hands you have, which are old before their time, and which know things now that no amount of book learning would have taught them. The work is real, the linen is clean, the building runs, you've earned this rest. Let the dark come, let the cold be ordinary, let Hortense's snoring be the sound that means you're home, or near enough to home that the difference doesn't keep you awake. Let your hands rest, they'll be ready in the morning. The candle goes out. The room is dark and cold and full of the breathing of 7 women who've all worked hard and are all tired and will all be awake before the sun. You drift. Somewhere in the palace, in rooms you've never seen. The guests are sitting at dinner tables covered in linen you pressed today. The candles are lit. The conversation is elaborate and the food is complicated and the clothes are extraordinary and the whole thing is a performance of wealth and taste and power. And it is beautiful, the way Versailles is always beautiful when seen from the right distance by the right eyes. Down here it is dark, and the dark is enough, and the quiet is enough, and sleep is already here, already working, already taking the day and dissolving it into the particular rest that comes after real work, after work done with your body and your mind together, after a day that asked everything of you and found you sufficient. Centuries will pass. In December, the water in the pump freezes. Not the basin water, not the water in the trough. Those freeze too, but that's ordinary. That's something you deal with every morning before 5 o'clock with your fist and a kind of practiced irritation. The pump itself freezes. The mechanism, the iron handle, the column of water inside the pipe somewhere between the earth and the spout. 3 mornings in a row you go to the pump with your bucket and the pump gives you nothing. The handle moving with a grinding protest that means ice inside the workings, which means the water that feeds the laundry has to come from somewhere else, which means one of the kitchen boys is assigned to bring it from the kitchen cistern, which means less water than usual, which means the morning schedule has to be rebuilt around a smaller supply. Madame Tremblay handles this without visible change of expression. She handles most things without visible change of expression. The pump freezes. She calculates the reduced supply against the morning's delivery and makes decisions about sequencing, about what gets washed now and what gets held until the pump unfreezes or the boy brings more water. Her adjustments are immediate and exact. You watch her do this and understand that this is what years of managing laundry in the same building through multiple winters looks like from the outside. Not distress, just calculation. Because everything that is happening has happened before, and everything that has happened before has been survived. You try to apply this. The pump is frozen. The supply is limited. What can be done with what is available? You look at the morning's delivery and sort it by urgency, and work in the order that urgency dictates. The cravats first, those go back the fastest, are needed the soonest, cannot be delayed without generating the kind of problem that has consequences down the corridor. Then the shirts, then the larger pieces, the sheets and tablecloths, which can hold a little longer if they've been properly stored. This is not particularly difficult. This is just the work adapted. What is difficult in December is your hands. The cracks have reached a level of severity that you hadn't anticipated, and that the lard is no longer fully managing. The deepest ones, the ones in the webbing between your fingers, the one along the outside of your right thumb that has opened 4 times now and closed and opened again, are a kind of constant low noise in your experience, always present, sometimes louder. When the cold water is extremely cold, the louder kind. When the iron is hot and you press near those areas, the loud kind. You work through it. Everyone works through it. Agnes has a crack on her left palm that split open in November and has been in various stages of healing and reopening since. Catherine lost the nail on her left index finger in October. Not dramatically, not traumatically. Just the nail lifted and eventually went. The hazard of sustained work in strong water. And the new nail underneath is still soft and takes getting used to. Genevieve has hands that are beyond the stage of cracking. Her skin is built up into something almost uniform, a kind of natural armour that has developed over 30 plus years of this work, smooth in the way stone is smooth after long erosion, not painful anymore, just permanent. Her hands are the future. You look at Genevieve's hands sometimes and try to decide how you feel about that future. On most mornings, you decide you feel fine. On the morning the pump freezes for the 3rd consecutive day, you feel less fine. Your right thumb is bleeding again, a thin line of red along the crack that you press your apron against until it stops, or mostly stops, and then wrap in a strip of cloth from the rag bag because there are things you cannot be bleeding onto and white linen is all of them. The cloth wrapping is awkward. It changes how you grip the iron handle. You compensate. You keep working. This is December. This is the specific cold of it. The specific cost. But there are other things about December. The palace is different in December. You know this from sound more than from sight, because your access to the parts of the palace where the difference is visible is limited to the same corridors and the same rooms you always move through. But through the walls, through the stone and the distance, you hear things that aren't there in November. Music, more of it than usual, and from different directions at different hours. Something ceremonial and large happening on the floor above you, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. The bass of it coming down through the stone-like weather. A bell pattern you haven't heard before, rung at an hour when bells not usually rung. Genevieve, when you ask, says, Christmas. At Versailles, Christmas is not the quiet family thing it was in your village. At Versailles, Christmas is a sequence of ceremonies, of performances, of gatherings that involve the entire court, which means hundreds of people dressed at their finest, which means hundreds of people generating additional laundry at a higher rate than usual, which means the delivery baskets that arrive each morning in December are larger and more various than at any other time of year. More silk. Silk is a disaster in bad water. Silk needs cold, gentle, precise treatment, none of the scrubbing board approach that works on linen. Because silk fibres are as different from linen fibres as glass is different from rope. They look similar at distance, they serve similar purposes, but apply the same force to both, and one of them becomes something you're paying for out of several months' wages. Madame Tremblay takes the silk herself mostly. The very good silk, but you've been given pieces of it to handle carefully with the approach she's explained. A small amount of soap dissolved in warm water, the fabric barely disturbed, the motion more of a cradling than a washing, and then a rinse so cold and so gentle that the silk barely knows it's been cleaned. The first time she gave you silk to handle, you held it for a moment before putting it in the water. The weight of it, the way it moved in your hands, Nothing like linen, nothing like the wool of your father's coat. Something that felt like water and made a sound like a very quiet whisper when it shifted. You put it in the basin as carefully as you would put something living in it, and when you took it out, clean, intact, the colour exactly as it had been when it arrived, you felt the specific satisfaction of having handled something difficult correctly. Madame Tremblay looked at it, said nothing. The nothing was the correct response. December also brings the candles, not the tallow candles that burn in the dormitory and the laundry, cheap and functional, smelling of animal fat and the things adjacent to animal fat. The candles that come through the service corridors in crates, hundreds of them, for the rooms above, beeswax candles, creamy yellow, each one substantial, each one burning with a cleaner light and almost no smoke. The smell of them when a crate is open near you, warm and faintly sweet, the smell of what bees make when they're making something for themselves, is so different from the ordinary smell of the service quarter that it stops you for a moment, like an unexpected word in a familiar sentence. The Hall of Mirrors, Suzanne tells you one evening, uses 20,000 candles on certain nights. You try to imagine this. You have a reasonable imagination. But 20,000 candles is a quantity that defeats ordinary imagination and requires something else. Requires you to stand very still and try to build the image piece by piece. And even then, what you build is approximate, a suggestion of light rather than its actual weight. Suzanne has seen it. Not from inside. Servants don't attend the grand ceremonies from inside the room. But she was once, she says, in the correct corridor at the correct moment when a door was opened, and the light that came through the gap in that open door was so far beyond ordinary light that she stood there for several seconds after the door closed, still seeing it on the insides of her eyelids. Like the sun, she says, not like daylight, like the sun itself was inside the room. You file this in the part of your mind that holds things you believe without having seen them. That's the other December thing. You get better at believing in the existence of the world above without needing to see it. The evidence comes down through the linen, the quantity of it this month, the quality of it, the silk, the embroidered pieces, the things that cost so much per yard that handling them changes how you breathe, the stains of the specific kind that a Christmas court generates, wine, wax, things that are more interesting than food or simple use. The linen tells you about the life above the way a river tells you about the mountains it came from. You can read the source in what arrives at your table. What arrives one morning in the middle of December is a piece of lace, not attached to anything, just lace, perhaps 8 inches long, 1.5 inches wide, the kind of fine needlepoint lace that requires months to produce a single yard of, that costs more than your annual wage for a length this small, that belongs on the cuff or collar of someone for whom several months of a woman's labour in Bruges or Alençon is a trim for a single garment worn on a single occasion. It is in the basket by accident. You can see this immediately. It's not meant to be here. It hasn't got a marking. It has arrived attached to something and separated from it somewhere in the collection process. And now it's here, in your sorting pile. 8 inches of the most expensive fabric you've ever touched in your life. Your hands stop again. The second time this month your hands have stopped. But this is different from the sheet. The sheet was a professional question, a question of discretion and knowledge and what you keep. This is simpler. Lace does not belong to you. Lace that cost what this costs and arrives by accident in a laundry basket. belongs to someone who will notice it's missing with the specific and urgent force of people who track very expensive things. You set it on Madame Tremblay's pile. Not your pile, not the general pile. Madame Tremblay's specific pile, the one that means this requires you specifically to make a decision. She arrives at her usual time. She goes through her pile, she finds the lace, she picks it up, holds it between her fingertips. Her face does something very brief and controlled, and then returns to its usual state. Where? The basket from the upper apartments, not marked. I think it fell off something. She looks at the lace for another moment. You didn't put it in your pocket. This is not a question. It is also not an accusation. It is a statement that is also a kind of backward compliment. The recognition of an action taken correctly rendered as the absence of the wrong action. No, madam. Good. She folds the lace carefully around 2 fingers, so that the folded piece is small and neat. She goes to her office. When she comes back several minutes later, the lace is no longer visible and she does not explain where it went. Within the hour you can tell from the way she moved through the room and the brief exchange she had with the woman who came to the service door that the lace has been returned to wherever it came from, which is the correct end of the story and also the end of the story. This is a thing about December. The stakes are higher, more people, more movement, more things flowing through more channels, more chances for something to go wrong, or be lost, or be damaged, or be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The laundry runs at a higher pace and with less margin for error. The weeks are harder in a way that you feel in the specific muscles that carry hard weeks. But you run with it. You've been here 8, 9, 10 months now, and the pace of November-December is something you begin to calibrate against rather than simply endure. You know where the pressure points are. You know which parts of the day go fast and which go slow. You know the signals that mean the morning has run better or worse than expected. Your hands still hurt, but they've found a new plateau of hurt, a sustainable hurt, the hurt of hands that have adapted to the work, even as they bear the marks of the adaptation. On the 15th of December, Madame Tremblay gives you silk cuffs. Not to keep, to wash. Cuffs from a coat belonging to someone in the royal household, the marking indicating a level of proximity to the king's immediate circle that makes the cuffs themselves feel slightly weighted with significance. Fine silk, ivory-coloured, with a border of drawn work, open-work embroidery in the linen beneath the silk, each tiny square of the grid pulled out by hand by someone somewhere over many hours. Cold water, Madame Tremblay says. 2 soap washes. Cold rinse, twice. Pin to the frame while wet, don't let them bunch. Press on the wrong side, medium iron, damp cloth between the iron and the fabric. You know most of this already. You're glad she said it anyway. The specificity is the instruction. The instruction is the trust. You wash the cuffs. It takes 40 minutes for a task that would take 7 minutes on ordinary linen, because everything is slower and more deliberate, because you're working through the open work with the tip of one finger, pressing gently rather than scrubbing, because the silk makes sounds when it shifts in the water, the delicate protest of expensive fabric being asked to hold still for cleaning, and you listen to it and adjust. You rinse them twice in water so cold your hands go white, pressing the fabric gently against your palms to squeeze the rinse through without distorting the weave. When you pin them to the drying frame, the fine frame, the small one for delicate pieces, you use 12 pins for each cuff, placed at intervals that keep the lace border flat and the silk body smooth and the open work exactly as it should be, because lace that dries distorted is lace that can't be straightened without the kind of additional work that creates a full afternoon of reckoning. 12 pins per cuff, 24 pins total. You stand back and look at them on the frame, wet silk in the winter light from the high window, the ivory colour of them, the delicacy of the open work, the way the silk catches the limited winter light and returns it softly. They're beautiful. Not in the complicated way Versailles is beautiful. Not in the way that requires everyone around you to be cold and tired and invisible for the beauty to exist. Just beautiful, the way a small and precise thing is beautiful. The way something made by careful hands over long time is beautiful. You leave them to dry and go back to the scrubbing table. The tablecloth waiting for you is large and made of damask and has had several encounters with what appears to be sauce and at least one encounter with wax. You put your brush to the wax first. The afternoon continues. In January, someone in the laundry steals a handkerchief. You know this the way you know most things in this room, not from being told, not from witnessing it, but from the particular change in the air that happens when something has occurred and everyone knows it, and the question is not whether everyone knows, but whether anyone will say it. The handkerchief is not valuable. It is a household handkerchief, marked with the insignia of a minor noble's apartments, the kind of piece that gets washed and returned a dozen times a week, and whose specific identity is tracked only by the embroidered initial in the corner. It is the kind of piece that could plausibly be said to have been mislaid, to have gone back to the wrong basket, to have been simply lost somewhere in the sorting. But it hasn't been mislaid. You know this. You know this because you sorted the delivery basket yourself and counted the handkerchiefs, and there were 6. And now there are 5, and the one that's missing is the one with the finest needlework border, the one that looks most like a piece someone might want to keep. You know who took it. Or you think you do. There's a woman, one of the women whose name you learned in December, Victoire, the quiet one from the end of the bench. And you know because of the way she's moving, which is the careful movement of someone who has done something and is maintaining a performance of ordinary. You recognize it because you've been aware of performances of ordinary since childhood, a skill that develops early in people who grow up needing to know when adults are pretending. You don't say anything to Madame Tremblay. This is a calculation, and you make it quietly, and you're not entirely comfortable with it. What Victoire needs, you don't know. You know almost nothing about her except that she's been here longer than you, that she doesn't talk much, that she works without complaint, that in December she looked at the Christmas crates of beeswax candles being brought through the corridor with an expression that stayed on her face for a moment too long and meant something you couldn't read. What a handkerchief could be sold for outside the palace. Not much. Enough for something, probably. A meal. Something for someone. You don't know enough about Victoire's circumstances to know what the something would be. What the consequence is if Madame Tremblay finds out and the source is clear. Dismissal. Exit through the wooden service door into the cold, with whatever you arrived with and the record of what happened, which is a record that follows a person, that makes the next position harder to find. That is a weight carried forward. You sort the pile. You count the handkerchiefs again in case you miscounted. You didn't miscount. 5. You make the afternoon's delivery basket with 5 handkerchiefs and write in the sorting log. 5 handkerchiefs, 1 apparent loss in collection, noted for follow-up. Apparent loss in collection. This means it might have fallen out of the basket in the corridor. It might have been missed in the original count when the pieces were gathered from the apartment. It might be anywhere between the apartment and this room, which is a long chain of possibility, and none of the links are your fault. You give the log to Madame Tremblay. She reads it. Her face does not change. "I'll look into it," she says. She never mentions it to you again. The handkerchief does not reappear. Victoire keeps working. She works quietly as she always works. You don't know if she knows you noticed. You don't know if Madame Tremblay worked out what happened and decided the same thing you decided, or if she genuinely believes the collection theory. Some things in this building run on the principle that a certain amount of not quite knowing is the mechanism that keeps everyone functional. You think about this for several days, about what you would want someone to do for you if you were Victoire, about what the handkerchief was for, about whether you did the right thing or the convenient thing or something in between, and whether in between is acceptable when there's no clean option. You don't reach a conclusion, but you stop thinking about it in the active way, and it settles into the back part of your mind where the sheet from December already lives, with other things that are not things. This is also what you're learning, that keeping things is not always a failure of honesty, that some information serves no one by being spoken, that the gap between what you know and what you say is not always dishonesty. Sometimes it is the specific labour of protecting the room you work in, the way Madame Tremblay protects it, with silence applied carefully and judgment that runs below the surface of events. You're not sure this is wisdom. It feels some mornings more like necessity, but necessity and wisdom share a border, and you're learning where the line is. February brings something unexpected, a day of sun, not summer sun, not the long, rich sun of June that turns the bleaching lawn to gold and does the final work on the whiteness of well-washed linen. February sun, which is cold even when it's present, which arrives at angles that illuminate rather than warm, that makes things visible without making them comfortable. But visible is something. Visible is more than November and December and January have reliably offered. Madame Tremblay comes into the laundry at 9:30 on the first properly sunny morning, and makes the decision that you can tell she's been waiting to make since November. The bleaching lawn. Not the full lawn. The season isn't right for the full process. The temperature still too low for the sun to do its best work. But the pieces that have come through the wash most recently, the pieces that have been as clean as the indoor drying, can make them, and still lack the final depth of white that only sunlight produces. Those pieces go outside. You carry them yourself because Madame Tremblay has asked you specifically, which you understand is not coincidence but a kind of trust rooted through logistics. The bleaching lawn is behind the laundry complex, a long rectangle of grass. Not the grand grass of the formal gardens, not something you'd describe to a visitor if you were explaining Versailles, just flat and slightly muddy at the edges and useful. You spread the pieces on the grass in the way you've been shown. Flat, smooth, overlapping, slightly avoided. Every piece in full contact with the wet grass beneath it. The interaction between wet linen and sun on grass is not something that can be fully explained by looking at it. The grass releases moisture as the sun hits it. The moisture rises into the fabric. The sun hits the fabric directly. And the photochemistry, you don't have this word, but you understand the phenomenon, does something to the linen that no amount of soap or hot water or lye fully replicates. The linen becomes white, really white, the white that is the actual goal of all the work, the white that the pressing room requires before it can properly press, the white that the apartments above receive and accept as the correct standard without knowing or caring how it was produced. You stand at the edge of the lawn and look at the pieces laid out in the morning sun. White on green, cold air, the smell of wet grass and cold February, and somewhere in it the very faint smell of clean linen that is both your professional product and the smell your brain has, over 10 months, come to associate with rightness, with a specific satisfaction of work completed correctly. From somewhere above you, high above, in the direction of the main palace building, music, string instruments, something formal and structured, the kind of music that the court performs in the morning as part of its general performance of being the court. At this distance and through the cold air it is softened, the edges taken off it, and what reaches you is something more like the idea of music than music itself, a sound that tells you there is music happening rather than a sound that is actually that music. You listen for a moment, then you go back inside, because the morning's work hasn't paused for the bleaching lawn and you have shirts waiting. You leave the linen in the sun and go back to the scrubbing table, and your hands find the brush and the rhythm reasserts itself and you're in it again. At noon you go out and turn the pieces. This is part of the process. Both sides need sun evenly. You work down the row, lifting each piece, turning it in the air, laying it back down, the cold of the February grass coming through your wooden shoes, even through the rags wrapped around them. Your breath comes in clouds. The sun is still there, still doing its specific cold February work on the linen. When you go out at 2 o'clock to collect them, the pieces are noticeably whiter than they were this morning. Not dramatically, not the summer result, but measurably. You hold one up to the sky and look through it. The light comes through the weave as tiny points, hundreds of them, the gaps in the linen visible as light the way the gaps in a wall visible as stars at night. The weave has been good linen, threads close and regular, no pulls or damage, the construction sound. Through the filtered winter light it's almost translucent. Suzanne, who has come to help carry, stands beside you. Not bad for February, she says. Better than I expected. Wait until June. June is extraordinary. You'll see things come off that lawn and think the sun made them clean even if they started filthy. Does that happen? Not really, but it looks like it could. You carry the pieces back inside, stacked carefully across both arms, the dry winter air and the cold having taken some of the dampness out of the surface layers, the weight lighter than when you laid them down. Madame Tremblay checks each piece when you bring them in. She holds each one up to the lamp, tilts it, makes a sound in the back of her throat that means either good or acceptable. It's hard to tell, but after 10 months of listening to these sounds, you've concluded both mean the same thing, which is continue. You continue. Suzanne stays to help sort the afternoon delivery. She from the linen press upstairs, a different domain from the laundry, the work happening further along in the process, the pressing and folding and distribution of pieces that have already come through your hands. She's been at Versailles for 4 years. 4 years. This is a length of time you're still trying to make real in your mind. 4 years of days like this day, multiplied. 4 winters of frozen pumps and cracked hands and cold basins. 4 summers of the bleaching lawn and the steam rising in clouds from the vats and the particular heat of the pressing room in July. Does it change? You ask her. After 4 years, she considers this. You change. The place doesn't. Change how? You stop expecting it to be different. You stop comparing it to what you thought it would be before you got here. She lifts a stack of napkins and begins sorting by marking. In the beginning I kept thinking, soon I'll understand it fully. Soon I'll know all of it. Then I'll feel settled. She shakes her head. You don't get to know all of it. It's too big. Too many parts. You just get to know your part very well, and you stop needing to know the rest. You sort your own pile. A shirt, 3 stockings, a handkerchief. Not a stolen one, just an ordinary one, marked correctly, exactly where it should be. Is that enough, you ask? She looks at you with the expression of someone who has asked herself this and arrived somewhere. It's what there is, she says. Whether it's enough is something you decide. You decide to hold that and think about it later. There's too much sorting to think about it now. In March, the first thing that happens is the smell outside changes. You notice it on the first morning of the month, going to the pump at 4:30 in the dark, the air still cold enough that your breath makes clouds. But underneath the cold, a different quality to the outdoor air, something that isn't there in February. The smell of cold earth beginning to think about not being frozen. The smell of the beginning of something, which is a smell that is very specific once you've learned it. That can't be confused with anything else. Spring, not here yet, but signalling. You fill your bucket. The pump is unfrozen, has been unfrozen since late January, reliable again, the ice in the mechanism a memory. Your bucket fills. The water is still cold but manageable, the managing cold rather than the damaging cold, the kind you can put your hands in without immediate consequence, rather than the kind that turns your skin white in 60 seconds. You carry the bucket back. The squeak of your left shoe in the cold, the familiar corridor, but the smell is still in your nose when you get inside, and you carry it with you to the laundry. This faint message from outside that the season is turning, that the months of total cold are coming to their end, that the bleaching lawn will eventually become what Suzanne promised. The morning's delivery is a standard size, no disasters hidden in it. You sort with Lisette. She's faster now, better, her hands knowing the marking system well enough that she rarely has to stop and look carefully, just touch and sort, touch and sort. And the pile divides itself into its correct categories with a satisfying efficiency. Genevieve's fire is strong this morning. She's run in 3 vats and the steam is everywhere, moving in the particular drifting way that means good temperature and good coverage. The room warmer than usual because the vat heat and the furnace together, a warmth you didn't realise you'd missed until it's here again, after months of working in the coldest version of this room. Your hands work without needing your mind's full attention. This is new, not entirely new. You've been here 10 months, and by 7 months you'd noticed that the basic tasks had started to live somewhere in your muscles rather than your thoughts. But still, when it happens, you notice it. The strange freedom of hands that know what they're doing and don't require supervision. You're working a shirt, the collar, the press and rotate of the brush on linen that's gone grey with accumulated life, and the water going grey around your board, and the collar gradually opening and releasing what it's been holding. This is ordinary work. This is the most ordinary thing in the world, which is to say it's the most ordinary thing in your world, in this building, in this room, in this specific life. You think about the village you left, the house your family lives in, the smell of it, wood smoke, the specific kind of food your mother makes, the outdoor smell of the particular kind of mud that comes from that kind of soil in that kind of season, the faces you've been here long enough to stop seeing in sharp detail, that have blurred slightly at the edges the way distant things blur, still there but requiring effort to bring into focus. You send money home every month. You've been doing this since the 3rd month, once the starting wages worked themselves into the rhythm that allows sending and still eating. still having the small amounts needed for candles and soap and the occasional Sunday expenditure. Your mother's letters, she dictates them to your older brother who writes better, arrive with the paper soft from being handled, the words in his handwriting but her voice, the specific cadence of how she asks questions and the way she describes things. The letters tell you about the village, who married, who had a child, who died this winter, whether the harvest was good, whether the roof held. They don't ask much about Versailles. They have no frame for Versailles, and you find it difficult to describe to them in letters because the pieces you can describe, the laundry, the routine, the cold, the work, don't add up to a picture of the place, don't communicate what it is to exist in the service quarter of the largest royal household in France. You've tried several times and stopped trying. You describe the food instead, which interests them, and the weather, which they can compare to their own, and occasionally something small and concrete that conveys something without needing the whole context. Last month you described the lace cuffs, the open work, the way the silk moved in cold water. Your mother, in the return letter, said, "That sounds beautiful. That sounds like something worth seeing." It was, you think. It was worth seeing. The collar is clean. You move to the next piece. March's particular event, the arrival of new apprentices, 2 of them coming from different places, arriving on the same morning in early March, standing in the sorting area with the same expression that is universal to new arrivals and that you can now read from across the room. The careful alertness, the body language of someone trying to appear less afraid than they are, the eyes doing the circuit of the room and landing on you as the person who is neither Madame Tremblay nor Geneviève nor obviously a fixture, and therefore potentially approachable. One of them is your age exactly. The other is younger, perhaps 15, with a face that looks like it's still deciding on its final form. Her name is Margot. She comes from somewhere east, a village you know the direction of but not the name. Madame Tremblay takes them through the basic introduction, the system, the marking, the hierarchy of pieces, the procedures for each type of fabric, the rules of the sorting area. You have heard this introduction before, filtered through the fog of being new and overwhelmed. From the other side it sounds different, clearer, more organized, a more efficient transmission of information than you could have absorbed 10 months ago. You watch Margot's face during the introduction, and you can see when she hits the wall. The moment when the information exceeds the brain's current capacity to receive it, when the face goes slightly distant and the nodding becomes automatic rather than engaged. You know that face. You made that face. Afterward, when Madame Tremblay has put them to work on the sorting pile under Lisette's oversight, you find yourself near Margot and say quietly, "Don't try to hold all of it today." She looks at you. What? Everything she told you. Don't try to remember all of it at once. You'll learn it by doing it. The first week, just try to learn the markings. The rest will come. Margot looks at you with the expression of someone receiving information they very much want to believe. Is it always this much? You consider how honest to be. The first month is the worst, you say. After that it settles into itself. This is true. It is also not the complete truth, because the settling into itself includes cracked hands and stone-cold floors and the specific fatigue of standing for 12 hours, none of which it would serve Margot to be told about in the first week. The first week needs to be survived. Information about what survives after the first week can come when the first week is over. "Thank you," Margot says. She turns back to her pile. You go back to your table. Over the next few days you watch her. She makes the mistakes that new people make. Wrong pile, wrong sequence, overwetting, one incident with the hot iron that produces a sharp exclamation, followed by immediate silence and the careful checking of a shirt cuff for damage. The shirt cuff is undamaged. Margot stands at the pressing board for a moment with her hand pressed flat against it, steadying herself. You know that moment. You've been in it. You go over and show her the iron temperature test. Damp cloth, quick press, no mark means correct. You show her twice, have her do it once, watch the result. Good, you say. She looks at you with the expression that means she doesn't know whether she's in trouble or not. You didn't burn it, you say. Close, but no burn. Pay attention to the sound. A correctly heated iron makes a sound like this when it hits damp cloth. You demonstrate. Too hot, and the sound changes. Too cool, and there's no sound at all. The sound is the test. Margot listens to the iron. Listens very carefully, head slightly tilted, the way people listen when they're trying to hear something new. Got it, she says, and then, how long does it take before you stop making mistakes? Long enough, you say, but they get smaller. She nods. She accepts this. You go back to your table and pick up your own iron and continue your own pile, and think that this is something you've learned that you didn't know you'd learned. The specific knowledge of how to be senior to someone who is where you were. Not expertise in the work, that's ongoing. That's something Genevieve has been accumulating for 3 decades and still adds to. But expertise in the particular difficulty of being new somewhere, the specific landmarks of it, which you know from having passed them. This is not nothing. On a Sunday in late March, you go to see the fountains. This requires some navigation. Sundays are yours, in the sense that no work is assigned, but they are not entirely free in the way the word free suggests. You are still within the palace complex, still bound by the same physical geography that constrains every other day. The dormitory, the service yard, the corridor to the kitchen area where Sunday dinner is served, the garden wall with its low gate. But there is also, on Sundays, a different energy to the service quarter. The purposeful movement of the working week is absent. People sit in doorways, mend things, talk without keeping track of time. The kitchen is slower, even the cats seem less industrious, and the gates to the formal gardens are on certain Sundays open to the household. Not all of the household, not at all times, but there is a tradition, old enough that no one now living can remember its beginning, sustained enough that it has become simply a fact of the place, that on Sunday afternoons in the warmer months, the lower household can walk in the formal gardens, not the terraces nearest the palace, not the fountains nearest the royal apartments, but the further reaches, the long walks between the shaped trees, the pools that sit at the intersections of the main alleys. Suzanne knows which gate to use and when. She has navigated this before. She has, over 4 years, developed a mental map of where in the formal gardens a household worker is unremarkable, and where they would become notable in a way that generates consequences. The eastern alleys, she says. The Apollo Basin is too close. Stay to the east. You walk with her and Catherine, and at a slight distance, because she's still learning everything, including how to walk at a casual pace, her whole body still at working day speed. Margot, who was invited because she looked, on Saturday evening, like someone who needed to be somewhere different from the dormitory. The garden in late March. The trees are beginning, very faintly, to suggest that they remember being green. The tips of the shaped yews and beeches just beginning to soften at the edges, the beginning of a texture change that will, in 6 or 8 weeks, be an explosion of new growth. The gravel of the alleys is raked. The raking is a daily thing, someone's entire job, the maintenance of this surface of perfect mathematical lines that is the ground-level component of the garden's insistence on order. You walk. The sound is different from anywhere else you go. Inside the service quarter, echoes off stone, the specific acoustics of enclosed spaces. In the service yard, cobblestone reverb. In the kitchen corridor, voices and the sounds of cooking amplified by the low ceiling. Here, near silence. The sound of gravel under feet, the distant murmur of water from a fountain somewhere ahead, wind through the shaped trees, and underneath everything a kind of quiet that is different from indoor quiet because it has space around it. You breathe it. Told you, Suzanne says. What? That expression. First time everyone makes it. You didn't know you were making an expression. You put your hand up to your face reflexively and Suzanne laughs. Actually laughs. Which she does rarely and which is, when it happens, slightly surprising. The way a rare bird is surprising when you see it in an ordinary place. The Apollo basin is ahead and to the right, visible at the end of a long perspective, its scale difficult to assess at distance. Too large to judge correctly until you're close enough that the largeness becomes undeniable. The figures in it, gilded bronze, the god rising from the water in his chariot, the horses of the sun, the attendant figures, are larger than people, which you know in advance and which your eyes still resist at first because people are the scale things are calibrated against, and these figures are not that scale. You stop at the correct distance, the one Suzanne indicated as the boundary, and look, the water is running. The fountains at Versailles don't always run. The hydraulic system that feeds them is complicated, and managing it is its own enormous undertaking, and the water pressure isn't always sufficient to run all the fountains simultaneously, and choices are made about which ones run when. But today, in the late afternoon Sunday sun of late March, the Apollo basin is running. The water rises from the centre of the basin in a column and falls outward in sheets, catching the light, the sound of it reaching you as a continuous soft roar that is the largest water sound you've ever stood near, larger than the river near your village, larger than anything indoor. The scale of it, the arc of the water catching the sun and throwing it back in pieces, hundreds of them, the light distributed across the basin's surface in a pattern that shifts constantly and returns to itself. The gilded figures at the centre, gold in the afternoon light. Real gold, or something close enough that your eyes can't tell the difference. The horses rearing out of the water, the chariot behind them, the figure of Apollo with his arm raised, toward the sun he represents, driving toward the thing he is. You stand there for a while. The water makes its continuous sound. The light moves on the basin. Around you, at various distances, other members of the household are doing the same thing you're doing, standing and looking. A group of kitchen workers sitting on a low wall nearby talking. 2 women from the linen room sitting on the grass at the edge of the alley, their shoes off, their faces turned up to the late sun. Margot is standing a few feet from you with her mouth slightly open. You understand. The mouth slightly open is the correct response. They do this for themselves, she asks. Just because they can. And because it communicates something, you say, which is something you've thought about. Something that has assembled itself in your mind over the months of living inside the logic of this place. It says, we have so much power and so much money that we can move this much water uphill for the sake of making it beautiful. The expense of it is the point. It works, Margot says. You look at the water. Yes, you say. It works. The sun is lower now. You have perhaps an hour before the gates close for the evening. You walk a little further east along the alley, into the part of the garden where the light between the shaped trees goes golden and long, the shadows extending in the direction of the palace, the geometry of the place most visible at this time of day, when the light is at an angle that shows you the structure of it. The deliberate receding perspective, the trees placed to create a sense of infinite extension, the mathematical principles of it visible to someone who has spent enough time looking to understand what to look for. A gardener, some distance away, is raking the gravel of a side path, working with the long, slow strokes of someone doing daily maintenance. He doesn't look up when you pass. His work is as invisible in this place as yours is, happening around the edges of the spectacle that requires it. You think about what Suzanne said in March. You stop comparing it to what you thought it would be before you got here, what you thought Versailles would be before you arrived. Difficult to fully reconstruct now because the reality has overlaid the anticipation so completely. You remember the idea of it, the largest, grandest, most powerful place, the centre of things. And you remember imagining that proximity to this would feel like something in particular, like being near a great fire, like something being conferred just by being in the presence of it. What proximity actually feels like after 10 months. This, the gravel under your feet, the water sound at the right distance, the late sun on the shaped trees, the gardener raking without looking up, the work, always the work, the white linen and the cold basin and the marks on the marking system, and the specific crack in your right thumb that has opened again this morning in the cold water. It doesn't feel like anything is conferred, but you're not sure conferred is the right category of thing to want. You've been thinking about what you want on the quiet Sunday evenings, and it's harder to articulate than you expected, the wanting. Not because you're unhappy. You're not unhappy. You've established this for yourself in various late-night assessments and arrived at the consistent conclusion that unhappy is not what you are, but because the shape of what you want has changed in ways you didn't predict. You wanted, before you came, to be here, to be somewhere important, to send money home and be the one who went. You are here. The money goes home. You're the one who went. What you want now is something more specific and more modest and in some ways more difficult. You want to press the silk cuffs correctly. You want Geneviève to look at your work and make the sound that means acceptable without looking at it again. You want Madame Tremblay to keep trusting you with the things that require being trusted. You want to see the bleaching lawn in June, the way Suzanne described it, the white that the sun makes that no indoor process fully replicates. You want to get through next winter without your hands getting worse than they were this winter. These are the things you want. They are small things, measurable things, things with a relationship to the actual daily conditions of your life. Whether they are enough, you decide. Each time the question comes up, that the question itself is the problem, that enough is a word that creates an appetite it can't satisfy, and that what serves you better is the word this. This morning, this shirt, this cold water, this crack in your thumb, this specific moment of standing at the edge of the Apollo basin with the water making its sound and the last of the day's sun on your face. This is what you have. Suzanne appears at your elbow. The gate closes at 7. You turn away from the basin, start back. In April, the volume increases. The court in spring is a different thing from the court in winter, in the same way that a machine running at higher speed is a different thing from the same machine at lower speed. The same parts, the same structure, but the pace and heat changed, the output requiring faster throughput and tighter management. Spring at Versailles means an increase in the public life of the palace, more ceremonies, more receptions, more occasions at which the king is publicly visible, and the court performs its function of surrounding that visibility with a sufficient display of magnificence. Magnificence requires linen. The morning delivery in April is notably larger than March, and March was larger than February. The seasonal accumulation of court activity is visible in your sorting pile. More handkerchiefs, the court handkerchief being an item used in public ceremony, and therefore used more when there is more public ceremony. More shirt collars of the elaborate kind, the ones with the careful embroidery, the ones that take their time on the scrubbing board. More napkins, more tablecloths, the table linens from more frequent large meals, and more of the very fine pieces, the silk, the lace, the embroidered chemises that belong to the ladies of the highest households, and come through the laundry in their tissue paper with the specific careful handling that their cost demands. Madame Tremblay gives you more of the fine work in April. Not all of it. Geneviève handles some, and Madame Tremblay still keeps the most significant pieces for herself. But more than before, a consistent upward movement in what you're trusted with, noticeable over the months, calibrated to what you can be trusted not to damage. The chemise on your table one Thursday morning in April, white linen so fine it's almost translucent, with a border of Pointe-de-France lace along the neckline and cuffs, the lace made in Alençon by needlewomen whose names you'll never know and whose work you're now responsible for not ruining. You look at it for a long moment before you put your hands on it. The lace border, you count the repeats. They're regular, each one an exact mirror of the last, the work of someone whose hands had internalized the pattern so deeply that they could reproduce it without thinking about it, the way your hands now move over the brush without your mind directing every stroke. You and the woman in Alençon, separated by hundreds of miles and years of different work, share this. A skill that has gone from effortful to automatic, a knowledge that has moved from the head into the hands. You put the chemise in cold water. The lace submerges slowly, reluctantly, the structure of it fighting the water's desire to flood through it. You press very gently with one finger along the border, working the cold water through the needle-point structure, the spiderweb complexity of it. A single broken thread in this lace is not repairable in this room. A single broken thread might be repairable by a needlewoman somewhere, given time and the right thread and the particular expertise of mending this specific type of work, but it's not repairable here, and it's certainly not something you want to be responsible for. You work slowly. The linen body of the chemise, easier. You work a small amount of dissolved soap through it with your fingers, not the brush. The brush is for sturdier things, for things that can take the pressure. This you persuade rather than scrub, coaxing the fabric clean without coercing it. When you're done and the chemise is in its final cold rinse, your hands are shaking very slightly, not from the cold, or not only from the cold. You pin it to the fine frame, 22 pins this time because the lace border requires the extra support. You step back and look at it. Clean, intact. The lace exactly as it arrived, undamaged. The linen white and flat and correctly pinned, drying without distortion. You exhale. You pick up the next piece. In May, the smell of the garden starts to come through the high windows of the laundry. Not dramatically. Not as something you'd necessarily notice if you weren't paying attention to the quality of the air in a room you spend most of your daylight hours in. But there it is. On a morning with the right wind direction, something green and growing. The smell of the gardens getting on with the business of spring at a considerable pace, coming through the small gap in the high north-facing window and arriving in the laundry like a message from somewhere. You notice it first on a morning in early May when you're at the sorting table and the air shifts and you stop for a moment, holding a shirt, because what your nose is doing doesn't match what your eyes are seeing. Your eyes are seeing the laundry, the vats, the tables, the frames, the stone walls, everything familiar and correctly in its place. Your nose is telling you there are apple blossoms somewhere nearby. You've been here long enough that the smell of the laundry is your normal. The lye and the coal smoke and the wet wool have been your baseline. The air you breathe that you stopped smelling consciously somewhere around month 4. Apple blossom, arriving in this specific context, is extraordinary in the way that ordinary things are extraordinary when they arrive somewhere they don't belong. You hold the shirt. You breathe. Genevieve is watching you from the furnaces. Window, she says. It opens. Stick. She means there is a stick propped against the wall beneath the window, specifically for the purpose of propping the window open on mornings when this is worth doing. You've worked in this room for 13 months, and you have never seen the window open. You get the stick. The window is high, requiring the stick extended above your head to reach the latch, and then a particular angled push to unstick it. The wood swollen with damp from the winter, and when it opens, the smell that comes through it is not subtle. It's the full spring garden, the complicated, specific smell of a large formal garden in May, doing everything a large formal garden in May does. The cut grass, the flowering, the wet earth of the border beds, the subtle sweetness of something Suzanne would probably be able to name and you can't, but which is present and real and extraordinarily, strangely welcome. You stand for a moment with the stick still in your hand and the smell coming through the open window over your head. Agnes, arriving at that moment with a load of sorted linen, stops and sniffs. The window, she says. The window, you say. She sets down her linen. She looks at the window with an expression of specific gratitude that has nothing complicated in it. Just gratitude, the direct kind. April always feels like it will never end, she says. And then May. And then May, you agree. The morning proceeds. The window stays open. The smell of the garden mixes with the smell of the laundry in a way that is not chemical or logical, but is simply good. The outside and the inside of your world briefly in the same air. A reminder in the form of fragrance that there is a garden on the other side of this wall, and that garden is real and present and available on Sundays, on the right kind of afternoon. At 11 o'clock, a butterfly comes in through the window, a brief thing. It's in the room for perhaps 30 seconds, navigating by whatever system butterflies use, moving in the abrupt, angular way of flight that looks random but presumably isn't. It passes over the vat where Genevieve is working. She looks up, watches it, says nothing, and makes its way to the window and goes back out. The laundry continues as if this didn't happen, but you find yourself thinking about it for the rest of the morning. June. The bleaching lawn in June. Suzanne was right. It's a Thursday morning in the first week of June, and you carry out the first load of the season. Pieces that have gone through the full indoor process, that are as clean as indoor cleaning produces, that need the sun to do the final work. And when you spread them on the grass of the bleaching lawn, the world outside is already doing more than the service yard does in November. The sun, the actual June sun. Not the pale, oblique winter sun that comes in at 45 degrees and lights without warming. This sun is present and direct and warm on your face when you look up at it, and on the grass it's been accumulating heat since early morning, and the interaction of that heat with the damp linen and the specific ultraviolet light that Genevieve explained to you in your 3rd month. You didn't have the term then, you don't have it now, but you understand the phenomenon begins immediately. You can, if you look carefully, see the linen brighten in the sun, not dramatically, not the way a candle brightens a dark room, more like the way a face changes when the person behind it decides something, a subtle shift in the character of the white, a deepening that is the opposite of a shade, an intensification of the colour you're trying to produce rather than a dilution of it. The sun is doing chemistry on the linen, and the chemistry is doing exactly what you spent all winter preventing the cold and the damp from doing, making the linen more completely itself. You spread 12 sheets on the grass in the morning light and go back to the laundry. At noon you turn them. The turned side, which was pressed to the grass, is fractionally less white than the top. This is normal, the sun reaching both sides at different intensities, and you lay it up to complete the cycle. At 2 o'clock you collect them. You carry the first sheet into the pressing room where Suzanne is waiting, and you hold it up in the pressing room window light. White. Not the white of clean and dried and pressed. A different white. The white that has been argued into being by a combination of soap and hot water and cold water and the specific photochemistry of the June sun on damp linen. A white that looks almost luminous in the window light, that holds the light differently from the indoor dried pieces. That is the actual target of all the work, the thing you've been producing approximations of for 13 months. Suzanne looks at it. There it is, she says. You stand holding the sheet in the window light for a moment longer than you need to. There it is. You set it on the pressing board. You pick up the iron. The pressing of a summer bleached sheet is its own specific pleasure. The iron moves over the surface and the linen responds differently from the indoor pieces. A slight resistance that comes from the structure of the fabric being fully engaged, every fibre doing what it's supposed to do, the weave compact and even and correctly oriented. The steam rises differently. The sound of the iron is right. The smell of it, clean linen under heat, the small minerality that is linen being ironed at the correct temperature, the smell that means done correctly. You press the sheet, you fold it, pressing each fold. You put it in the delivery basket with the tissue paper between it and the next piece. Your hands are good this morning. The June warmth has, as Genevieve suggested it would, softened the worst of the winter damage. The deepest cracks have closed. The redness is less pronounced. Your hands look like your hands again rather than the hands of someone much older. And while the summer won't undo a full winter, and they'll still carry the marks of what they've done, they hurt less, and less is better. You work through the afternoon with the window open and the garden's smell coming in, and the pile diminishing sheet by sheet, and the day being the kind of day that June sometimes produces, correct. A day that is exactly what the day before suggested it would be, that delivers on its morning's promise, that contains no surprises severe enough to alter the essential character of it. At the end of the afternoon, Madame Tremblay comes through the room with the expression that means she has assessed the output, and the assessment is positive. She stops at your corner, looks at your finished pile. The Alençon border pieces, she says. You've been doing those. Yes, madam. Continue. She moves on. Continue. This is a small word that contains in Madame Tremblay's mouth a larger meaning. It means your work is correct, and you will be trusted with more of it. And this is my way of telling you so without saying more than necessary, because more than necessary is not something I provide. You collect the finished pile and carry it to the delivery baskets and sort it into its correct destinations. The last piece, the chemise with the Alençon border, pressed, folded in tissue, going back to the apartment it came from. You set it in the basket. Done. The evening, dinner, the stew that is slightly better than the stew usually is, because something in the kitchen went right, or the cook is in a good mood, or it's a day that produces better stew for reasons you can't determine from the outside. The bench, the table, Agnès talking about the vineyard, which now, after 18 months of this conversation, you've developed a genuine if second-hand relationship with. Margot sitting across from you, no longer frightened, or at least frightened of different things than she was in March. The things that you know about rather than the things you've already passed. You tell her about the bleaching lawn, about what the linen looks like after a June morning in full sun. Her face does the thing that faces do when they receive information they can look forward to, a small shift toward the future, toward the thing that's coming. Next week, you say. If the weather holds? I'll want to see it, she says. You will, you say. The evening closes, as evenings close, the supper cleared, the work of the day finished and settled, the building around you making its night sounds. You walk up the corridor to the dormitory, the candle stub making its circle of light around you. In the dormitory, Hortense is sitting up, doing something with a piece of cloth and a needle. Her hands work in the candlelight with the same practiced automatism that your hands have when they're at the scrubbing board. She doesn't look up when you come in. You sit on your side of the pallet. You pull off your shoes. The squeak of the left heel, quieter in the summer because the wood has dried out but still there, still itself. Good day, Hortense asks. You think about the bleaching lawn, the sheet held up to the pressing room window. Madame Tremblay's continue. The garden smell through the open window. The butterfly. Yes, you say. Hortense nods and continues her sewing. You lie down. The summer night is warm enough that the thin blanket is adequate. Through the high window, not full dark yet, just the deep blue of a June evening, the long northern twilight that comes this far south in summer. The sky still giving light at 9 o'clock. You are 14 months into this life. You know things now that you didn't know 14 months ago, and that you couldn't have learned without living through all of it. The 4:30 mornings, the frozen pump, the cracked hands, the sheet in December, the handkerchief in January, the lace cuffs, the bleaching lawn, the butterfly in the laundry. You know the markings. You know the temperature of the iron by the sound it makes. You know that Genevieve's highest praise is silence, and that Madame Tremblay's highest praise is a single word. You know what the garden smells like in May through the high window, and what the Apollo basin sounds like on a Sunday afternoon, and what it feels like to stand on the bleaching lawn in June, with white linen in your arms and the sun doing the final work. You know what it is to be invisible in a building full of important people, and you've decided, in the way that decisions form slowly in the quiet part of your mind, without fanfare, without the moment of dramatic clarity that decisions are supposed to have, that invisible is not the same as insignificant. The linen is clean. The shirts are correctly pressed. The chemises with the Alençon borders are intact and white and returned to their correct apartments. You did that. Your hands did that. Somewhere in this building the evidence of your work exists in every clean surface, every pressed fold, every correctly starched cravat end falling at exactly the right angle. Invisible evidence. Evidence that announces itself only when it's absent. that people notice only as a negative, only when the shirt is wrong, only when the linen is stained, only when the press mark is crooked. When it's right, it's transparent. It disappears into the service it provides. This is what you do. You make things that disappear. You've decided this is a contribution, not the contribution you imagined when you were young and imagining this city, this palace, this life. But contributions rarely look like their imagined versions. They look like what they actually are, which is usually smaller and more specific and more tied to your actual hands and your actual skills and the actual conditions of your actual morning. Your actual morning starts at 4 o'clock. The pump is working. The water is cold. Your hands will hurt. The scrubbing table will be there, and the vats will be there, and Geneviève will be already present, and Madame Tremblay will arrive at 4:15. And the linen, always the linen. You close your eyes. The building around you breathes. Summer Versailles. 40,000 people settling into the long warm evening. The formal gardens lit by the last of the June light. The fountains running at the basin where Apollo drives his gilded horses toward the sun. Up there, in rooms you've never seen, the court continues its performance of magnificence and power, the ceremony that this whole enormous structure was built to support and display. Down here, the dormitory, the women who made the linen white, the particular quiet of exhaustion earned by real work. Let the evening go. Let the blue drain out of the window. Let the sounds of the building become the sounds of night. You are warm enough, fed enough, learning enough, contributing enough. You have a skill and you are deepening it. You have colleagues who are teaching you and people you're beginning to teach. You have a room to sleep in and work to return to, and money that goes home, and a mother who writes letters in your brother's handwriting, and the letters always end the same way. We think of you. They think of you. You think of them in the quiet moments, in the sorting and the scrubbing and the evening review of the day's finished pile. You think of the village and the fields and the people whose faces are still there in your memory, even if the edges are softening. And you think of the bleaching lawn this morning, and the sheet held up to the window, and Suzanne saying, "There it is. There it is." The specific satisfaction of the thing done right, of the skill applied correctly, of the work that had to be done and was done by you and done correctly. There it is. Let sleep come, the way it always comes at this hour, after this much of the day. Through the body first, the release of the muscles that have held the day's work, the slow unwinding of effort, the pleasant ache of limbs that have done what they were asked to do. Then through the mind, the thoughts slowing, the day's events settling into their correct places, the sorting completed, the pressing done, the delivery baskets packed and sent. You are an apprentice laundress at the court of Versailles. You are 18 years old and your hands know things they didn't know. You handle the most intimate evidence of the most powerful lives in France, and you keep what needs to be kept and return what needs to be returned, and you wake up at 4 in the morning and do it again. Tomorrow, the same corridor, the same door, the same smell arriving before you've fully opened your eyes. Geneviève at the furnace, Madame Tremblay at the 15:15. The morning delivery sorted correctly, piece by piece, the marking system read in the tips of your fingers, the bleaching lawn if the weather holds, the iron at the right temperature, the cravats in tissue paper, the things that make this palace possible, done without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without the record that would allow anyone 300 years from now to know your name. Your name. You say it to yourself in the quiet of the almost dark, in the way you sometimes do at the end of days like this. Not to remind yourself of it, you haven't forgotten it, but to verify that it's still there, that you are still the person who arrived here 14 months ago, and are still that person even after everything the work has asked of you, and taken from you and given you. You're still here. Your hands are older, and they know things. The linen is clean. The day is done. Let sleep take you the way the cold water takes the stain, slowly, comprehensively, reaching into every part of you and releasing what it finds there, lifting what needs to be lifted, returning the fabric to itself. Let the night be enough. Let the rest be sufficient. Let the morning come when it comes, as it will, as it always will, at 4 o'clock, with the dark and the cold and the smell of the laundry and the work that is yours to do. But that is tomorrow. Tonight, this. The warmth of June through thin walls, the breathing of the women around you, Hortense's beginning snore, the early stage, the almost quiet stage, and somewhere in the building above you, faintly, the last of an evening's music, strings at a great distance, going through the stone like water through linen, softened and diffused, and arriving here as the idea of itself. Beautiful, distant, not yours, and also yours. Yours in the specific way that things are yours when you're part of the structure that makes them possible. The music plays in rooms your hands have kept clean. The guests sleep in beds your work has made ready. The performance continues because the maintenance continues, invisibly, correctly, by hands that wake before dawn and know what they're doing. Centuries will pass. Versailles will become a place people visit to stand in the rooms and imagine what it was like. They will stand in the Hall of Mirrors and imagine the candles. They will walk the formal gardens and imagine the court. They will read in beautifully printed books with photographs about the ceremonies and the politics and the lives of the people who made this place history. Almost none of them will think about the laundry. A very few will. The ones who wonder, while standing in the grand rooms, how the sheets were so white. The ones who follow the question down to the service quarter, the stone corridors, the low ceiling of the room where the vats were. The ones who want to understand not just the performance but the mechanism. They will find very little. A few records, a general accounting of the household structure, the names of the people who ran things, not the people who worked in the rooms where things ran. Your name will not be there. But the linen was white. The cravats were pressed. The silk cuffs with the openwork borders went back to their apartments intact. You did that. You. And now you sleep. Now your body has permission, and your mind has permission, and the day releases you from its grip, and the night has you. The blue in the window is gone. Full dark now. The good dark of a summer night, warm enough to be gentle, deep enough to hold you. Go. Let it hold you. You've been holding enough. Let go. Good night.